A man who bought entire cities couldn't buy one woman's silence, and that single mistake cost him everything he thought he owned. This is the story of a deal no contract could contain. A woman who walked into the most dangerous room in New York carrying a needle and thread, and walked out carrying the whole empire on her back. If you're watching this right now, hit that like button, drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, settle in. This one's going to take everything you've got. The needle was the wrong gauge. Maren Holloway knew it the second she pulled it from the kit. A blunt-tipped tapestry needle jammed in with the sharps. Some stagehand's lazy substitution that she'd deal with tomorrow, loudly, in front of whoever was responsible. She sorted through the case with practiced efficiency, fingers moving on instinct while her eyes tracked the clock on the wall of her backstage workshop at the Kendrick Theater on West 44th Street. 8:43 p.m. 17 minutes until curtain call for Act 2. The leading man had split his trousers from the waistband to mid-thigh during the quick change, and the understudy's emergency costume was 3 inches too long in the inseam, and Maren was simultaneously threading 2 needles with 2 different colors of thread while holding a pin between her back teeth and listening to her assistant Priya describe the situation as if Maren were somehow unaware of it. The seam just completely, it went all the way through the lining. And Daniel says he can feel the draft, so he's concerned that, And the director is asking if we need to pull the... Maren extracted the pin from between her teeth. Tell the director we don't pull anything. Tell Daniel to stop moving around in it and stand still like a person. Tell him I'll be there in 90 seconds. Priya went. Maren capped her thread case, snapped the kit shut, and moved through the narrow corridor that connected the costume workshop to the backstage wing with the efficient gait of a woman who had spent 15 years navigating spaces built for people half her size. She was a substantial woman, broad-shouldered, full-hipped, with arms that had spent years hauling garment racks and heavy fabric bolts, and she moved in her body like she'd signed a long-term lease on it and wasn't interested in renegotiating. Her dark hair was up in a clip that had been in place since 6 a.m. She hadn't eaten since lunch. She didn't particularly care about either of those things right now because Daniel Ferris was standing in the wing in his split trousers looking like he might cry. Okay. She took one look at the damage and exhaled through her nose. Okay, it's not the world ending. It feels like... Turn around. He turned. She assessed. The split had caught the lining but missed the outer shell at the back center seam. Bad but manageable. A whip stitch, tight, doubled thread. It would hold through the 40 minutes remaining in the show if he didn't repeat whatever explosive choreography had caused the original failure. She started working without ceremony, needle moving fast. Don't sit down during the library scene. I always sit during the... Not tonight. But the blocking requires... Daniel. She didn't look up. If you sit down during the library scene tonight, I will hear the seam pop from the workshop, and I will walk on stage during your monologue to fix it in front of the audience. Your choice. He was quiet for the remaining 80 seconds it took her to finish. She nodded off, bit the thread, stood up. Go. He went. Priya materialized at her elbow. You wouldn't actually walk on stage. Absolutely not. But he doesn't know that. Maren tucked her kit under her arm and turned back toward the workshop. What's the Bresciano fitting situation tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. The whole cast, but... Priya hesitated, which was unusual. Priya Kapoor was not a hesitating sort of person, which was why Maren had hired her. There's something else. Someone came by about an hour ago, while you were dealing with the Act 1 emergency. Who? He didn't give a name. He gave a card. She held it out. Maren took it. Heavy stock, no logo, no company name, just a number printed in plain serif font, and beneath it in smaller type, regarding urgent wardrobe services. Significant compensation guaranteed. Did he at least describe what the job was? No, he just said the compensation was significant and that it was time-sensitive. Maren turned the card over. The back was blank. What did he look like? Like someone who was used to not being questioned about things. She should have thrown the card away. That was the sensible thing, and Maren Holloway was, fundamentally, a sensible person. a person who had built her entire career on sensibility, on the pragmatic management of crises, on understanding that a show kept running because someone behind the curtain was keeping their head when everyone on stage was losing theirs. She had a packed schedule for the next 2 weeks, a fitting with the Bresciano cast in the morning, a traveling production of Carousel arriving Thursday that needed full inventory review, and a 16-year-old apprentice she was mentoring who required genuine attention and not the distracted half-attention Marin sometimes caught herself distributing when she was stretched too thin. She slid the card into her kit pocket. She told herself she was just keeping it, not using it, just keeping it. She called the number at midnight from her apartment on the Upper West Side, sitting at her kitchen table with a bowl of leftover pasta and her reading glasses on, because she was 38 years old and her eyes had opinions about small print in low light that they hadn't had at 25. It rang once. "Ms. Holloway." Not a question. He'd been waiting for the call. "Who is this?" "My employer is interested in retaining your services for a private event this weekend. The compensation, I heard, significant. What's the job?" A beat, then. "It's more specific than a typical wardrobe engagement. He'd prefer to explain the full scope in person." "Your employer doesn't get to decide how I receive information about a job I might decline." "What's the scope?" Another beat. This one longer. She got the impression she was being evaluated. "He requires a companion for a business event. Someone who can perform convincingly in a high-pressure social environment. He's had difficulty finding someone with the right combination of composure, and he wants a date. A wife, technically." Marin set down her fork. "I'm sorry?" "A temporary arrangement for a weekend. There's an international business negotiation that requires—" "Stop." She pressed 2 fingers to her forehead. "You're describing something that sounds like it belongs in a movie from 1987. Who is your employer?" "His name is Cassian Reeves." The name landed without fanfare, which meant either he was no one worth knowing or someone so far beyond the social circles Marin occupied that his name didn't come with the usual cultural gravity. She didn't follow financial news. She didn't follow crime news. She followed show schedules and fabric availability and whether the dye lots on the replacement velvet matched the originals. "And what does Mr. Reeves do?" "He manages a number of business interests." That's the most uninformative sentence I've heard in years, and I work with theater people. She picked up her fork again. "Tell your employer that I appreciate the inquiry and I'm unavailable this weekend. Good night." She hung up. She finished her pasta. She went to bed. At 6:30 the following morning, her buzzer rang. She answered the intercom without getting up from the bed, which required her to shout across the room. "Who is it?" "Building management, Ms. Holloway. There's a delivery." "Leave it at the door." "It requires a signature." She got up, put on the robe that was hanging on the back of the door, went to the front door, opened it, and found not a delivery person, but a man in an impeccable charcoal suit who was not the building manager and was not holding a package and looked like he had been awake since before sleep was invented. "I'm sorry to come to your home," he said. He didn't sound particularly sorry. "My name is Gareth. I'm Mr. Reeves's personal assistant. He'd like to meet with you at 8 a.m. this morning." "I told your colleague last night." "He knows. He's asking anyway." Gareth reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. "He asked me to give you this." Marin took it. Inside was a check made out to her name. The amount was $30,000. "That's to cover the meeting," Gareth said, "regardless of whether you accept any further arrangement." Marin looked at the check. She looked at Gareth. She thought about the fact that the Carousel production was arriving Thursday, and she had 2 apprentices whose stipends she was partially covering out of her own pocket because the union administrative delay had held up their program funding for 3 months. And she thought about the bathroom renovation she'd been postponing. And she thought about the fact that $30,000 for a meeting she could walk out of at any point was not an offer that happened to sensible people. She told herself she was still being sensible. 8 o'clock where? The address was a building on Park Avenue that didn't have a visible lobby entrance from the street. You turned into a side corridor, and a man in a dark jacket was standing at a private elevator that took you to the 48th floor without stopping anywhere in between. Marin rode up in that elevator with her costume kit over one shoulder. She had a Bresciano fitting immediately after this, And she wasn't rearranging her schedule for anyone. And she looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors and thought that she looked exactly like what she was. A working professional who had been up since 5:30 and who had dressed for a 9 a.m. fitting with a theater cast, not for a meeting in a Park Avenue penthouse. Dark trousers, a loose silk blouse in burgundy, her good Oxfords. Her hair was down for once, because she'd run out of time to put it up, and it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked fine. She looked like herself. She had no interest in looking like anything else. The elevator opened directly into a living space that was large enough to land a small aircraft in, floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides. The city below, gray and working in the early morning light. Minimal furniture, expensive, the kind that said, money without trying. A long table along one wall held architectural models of what looked like buildings. 3 of them, cities she didn't recognize. Cassian Reeves was standing at the window with his back to her. She waited 3 seconds, during which he didn't turn around, and then she said, "I'm going to go ahead and assume the theatrical pause is intentional, and you can turn around whenever you're done with it." He turned around. He was not what she'd expected, though she couldn't have said precisely what she'd expected. Something more cinematic, probably. Something assembled from the composite image of powerful men that culture had built up over decades. He was tall and lean in the specific way that came from activity rather than effort, and probably past 50, though not obviously so. Dark hair, more silver than not. A jaw that looked like it had been through something. He was wearing a shirt with the top button open and no jacket, which was either deliberately disarming or meant he'd been in this building since before she arrived and hadn't gotten around to finishing dressing. His eyes were the color of good whiskey held up to light, and they were currently examining her with the frank assessment of someone who was accustomed to evaluating things quickly and didn't feel the need to pretend otherwise. "You brought your kit," he said. "I have a fitting after this. Don't read into it." He almost smiled. It didn't quite form, but the potential was there. "Gareth said you were direct." "Gareth's a perceptive person. Sit down, Mr. Reeves. I have 45 minutes. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the arrested curiosity of a man who is rarely told what to do. And then he moved to the seating area and sat. She sat across from him, set her kit on the floor, and looked at him. "Your assistant told me you want someone to pretend to be your wife for a weekend. That's a strange thing to need. Tell me why you need it." He studied her for a moment, then, "I'm finalizing an alliance with a business consortium, old world partners. The kind of people who place significant weight on family stability. A man who appears to have no anchor is, in their estimation, a liability, a loose element. They've seen what happens to men in my position who have no one to steady them, and they're not wrong about the pattern." He paused. "I've tried other approaches. They haven't worked. Other women. Other arrangements." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. "They failed before the event or during it. The environment it's not comfortable for most people. These are not forgiving individuals. And yet you think I'd be comfortable. I don't know what you'd be. That's why I'm having this conversation instead of sending another contract." Marin crossed her legs. "What's the event?" "A private dinner Saturday evening, black tie, 12 guests. My partner and his associates will be there to finalize the terms. If the evening goes as intended, the agreement is signed Sunday morning. You'd attend the dinner, the Sunday breakfast, and you'd leave Sunday afternoon, total of roughly 20 hours of engagement. And these aren't legitimate business partners." It wasn't a question. He didn't answer it like one. "My business interests are diverse." "Mr. Reeves," she looked at him steadily. "I'm a theater professional. I work with actors and directors and designers, and every single one of them has a tell when they're avoiding something. Yours is the phrase business interests. Say whatever you need to say. I'm not a journalist and I'm not recording this." This time the almost smile did finish forming. It changed his face, made it harder to be entirely certain of him, which she suspected was the point. "Some of my business operates outside conventional legal frameworks," he said. "The alliance I'm finalizing would consolidate significant control over certain markets. The men at that dinner have, collectively, ended things they found inconvenient. I need them to find me stabilizing rather than inconvenient." "So I'd be in a room with dangerous men." "Yes. And if they find out I'm not actually your wife, that would be a problem. He said it without particular effect, the way someone described weather. Marin was quiet for a moment. She looked at the city through the windows. A pigeon was working its way across the exterior ledge of the window opposite, indifferent to its altitude. 2 million, she said. He hadn't been expecting a number from her. She watched the surprise move across his face before he controlled it. That's significant. Your word. You told your assistant significant. 2 million is significant. It's also what the risk merits. She reached into her kit and pulled out the small notebook she used for production notes. She kept it in there out of habit. And I have conditions. You haven't agreed to anything yet. I know. These are the conditions I'll agree under. I'm telling you in advance so you can decide whether you want to keep listening. She opened the notebook. First, I designed my own appearance for the event. I won't wear something a stylist picked out to make me look like someone I'm not. I look like me or I don't go. He nodded once, slowly. Second, I need every detail about these people you expect me to know. Their names, their relationships to each other, their preferences, their sensitivities. I've built convincing narrative structures under pressure for 15 years. I can work with information. I can't work without it. That's reasonable. Third, if I identify anything at that event that feels wrong, tactically, socially, in terms of my personal safety, I reserve the right to name it out loud and act on it without consulting you first. She looked up from the notebook. That one's non-negotiable. He was watching her the way she'd seen directors watch an actor suddenly nail a reading they hadn't expected, like something had shifted in the quality of the room. Most people don't come in here and give me non-negotiable conditions, he said. Most people probably need something from you beyond this specific transaction. I don't. I need the 2 million. After Sunday afternoon, I go back to my life and you continue with yours, and we never have to speak again. She closed the notebook. Those are my terms. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city made its city sounds. Sirens somewhere, the percussion of traffic, a distant horn. Cassian Reeves looked at Marin Holloway with the careful attention of a man measuring something he hadn't expected to find valuable. Who are you? He said. I told you. I'm a wardrobe supervisor. That's what you do. It's also what I am. I make things work that looked broken. I fix what's come apart under pressure. I make people believe in something that isn't entirely real. She stood and picked up her kit. I'll need the background files by tomorrow afternoon. I'll create the framework for our cover story, and you'll need to learn it as well as I will. We're not going into this rehearsal light. He stood too. He was taller than she'd registered while he was seated, and she was not a small woman, but she didn't adjust her posture or her gaze. Eye contact was information, and she was collecting it. Miss Holloway. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and dry, and he didn't make it a performance. Don't call me that, she said. If we're doing this, you call me Marin. You've been calling me Marin for 8 years. His hand was still holding hers for just a beat past the natural endpoint of a handshake. 8 years, he repeated. That's how long we've been together in the story I'm going to build. Long enough that it's boring to talk about, which is what makes it believable. She withdrew her hand and started toward the elevator. Have Gareth send me the files. I'll have a draft of our history to you by Thursday. Marin? She stopped, turned. Why 8 years? He asked. She considered. Because at 5 years, people still ask how you met and think it's a story worth hearing. At 8, they've heard it. They assume it's comfortable and unremarkable. Unremarkable is harder to question. She pressed the elevator button. Also because you look like a man who'd take approximately 3 years to stop being difficult before someone decided to stay with you. He looked at her. She stepped into the elevator. Unchecked. She built the history on Tuesday night at her kitchen table with a fresh notebook and a glass of water and the files Gareth had sent over. 11 pages on the key guests, 3 pages on the location, 2 pages on the specific sensitivities of the man whose alliance Cassian was securing, a patriarch named Dominic Sabo who was 73 and who had, according to the file, buried 2 wives and 4 business partners, and who placed his esteem for family loyalty somewhere in the vicinity of a religion without the softness. Marin read everything twice. Then she started writing. Their first meeting, a charity auction benefit in the spring. Not a gala, too staged, but a smaller event, a theater benefit, something she might reasonably have attended. He'd outbid someone for a piece she'd mentioned aloud she liked. She'd been irritated. It became a recurring feature of their early dynamic. His tendency to remove obstacles through money before she could address them herself. Her consistent and specific objection to this tendency. The fact that she'd kept seeing him anyway because, whatever else he was not boring. She wrote it the way she wrote production notes, precisely with attention to sensory detail that made things feel lived in rather than invented. The apartment where they'd spent their first real conversation. The weekend in New Orleans that had been his first attempt at spontaneity and her first glimpse of the person he kept behind the controlled exterior. The argument, their worst, about something real, something a fictional couple would actually fight about, the kind of disagreement that didn't resolve cleanly and left a mark that was still slightly tender if you pressed on it. She gave them shared preferences and incompatibilities. She gave them the shorthand language of people who'd spent years in proximity. She gave Cassian habits she'd deduced from the limited time she'd spent in his presence. The barely formed almost smile, the stillness he used as a default rather than animation, the careful way he chose words when something mattered, and the careful way he chose different words when he was deflecting. She noted to herself at about 1 a.m, very good at this. Too good, maybe. But that was a thought for after Sunday. What? They met Thursday afternoon in a private room of a members-only club on the east side that smelled like old leather and money, and the particular hush of spaces where loud conversation was considered a social failure. Cassian arrived exactly on time and sat across from her and accepted the notebook she slid across the table. He read it. All of it. He read slowly, which she hadn't expected from a man with his apparent level of operational velocity, and he didn't speak until he'd reached the last page. New Orleans, he said. You need a real city. People ask follow-up questions about invented places. The argument in March. You need to know the shape of it, not to perform it, but to reference it. The way couples do when they're not trying to. A sideways acknowledgement. Something that says, we've had a hard moment and survived it without advertising the details. What do I say if they ask how we met? You don't lead with it. You say a charity benefit and you move on. If someone presses, she liked something I was going to bid on. I outbid her anyway. She's never forgiven me. She paused. Then you look at me in a way that says you don't entirely mean that. He looked at her, not performing it, just looking. And it was, she thought, a very specific kind of look. The kind that said, I know exactly who you are and I'm still here, and I find this amusing in a way I won't explain. It lasted about 2 seconds, and then he picked up his coffee cup and the moment closed like a door. You're good at this, he said. That's not a surprise to me. It's a surprise to me. He set the cup down. Every other arrangement I attempted, within 10 minutes of the initial meeting, they started performing, trying to become something they thought I wanted. You haven't done that once. That's because what you want isn't actually my primary concern. What I need is for the people at that dinner to believe something. That's a different project. He considered this. What if I told you that you'd been the first person in about 7 years who said something in this room that I couldn't have anticipated? She looked at him across the table. Outside the window, rain had started. Early November rain, gray and committed, the kind that settled in for hours. I'd say that sounds lonely, she said. And I'd say it's not relevant to the job. He nodded. Something in his face had shifted again, that minimal movement she was learning to read. Not quite closed, not quite open. I'll know all of this by Saturday, he said, and tapped the notebook. I know you will. She picked up her tea. Tell me about Dominic Sabo. Why? Because the files describe what he values and what he's done, but I need to know how he moves through a room, whether he controls the space or works from the edges, whether he jokes or whether he waits for other people to joke, whether he watches the women in the room or ignores them. Cassian was quiet for a moment. He watches everyone. He assigns them a value quickly, and then he doesn't revisit the assessment unless something forces him to. So first impression is the only impression, essentially. And the women he's encountered in your previous attempts at this, what did they look like? A careful pause. Decorative, he said, by design. And he respected that. He expected it. Marin set down her tea. Then I'm going to be a very interesting problem for him. Cassian looked at her with that whiskey-light focus. Yes, he said very quietly. You are. Well, Saturday arrived with the cold certainty of a deadline. Marin spent the morning in her workshop, not because she had production work to do, but because the space steadied her. The smell of fabric and thread, and the particular dry warmth of the pressing iron going through its cycles. She'd already completed the gown, had started it Wednesday night after the Thursday meeting confirmed in her mind what she'd begun to understand on Monday, that this event would require her to be entirely herself, and that entirely herself meant the gown had to be made, not bought. She'd found the fabric on Thursday at a supplier she'd used for years, a bolt of deep crimson silk charmeuse with a weight and movement that she'd been saving in the back of her mind for something that mattered. She cut it herself. She constructed it herself, the way she'd constructed costumes for leading ladies for 15 years, except this time, the leading lady was her, which was new, and she did not find it as simple as she'd expected. The dress was floor-length, with a structured bodice that required architectural precision to get right, because she'd given it a neckline that required the seaming to do the work of support without external hardware. And she'd cut the skirt with a slight train that moved when she moved and pulled slightly when she stood still. It had a long sleeve on the left arm and a bare shoulder on the right, a choice she made not for drama, but because the asymmetry suited her body in a specific way she'd understood for years, and that most retail clothing had no interest in accommodating. She'd finished it at 2 a.m. Friday. It was the best thing she'd made for herself since, actually, she wasn't sure she'd ever made anything for herself that she was this satisfied with. She'd made things that were technically accomplished and things that were functional and things that were professional, but this was the first time she'd made something for herself that was also entirely without apology. She got dressed at 5 p.m., took her time with it. The dress required deliberate movement, and she gave it that. Her hair she arranged herself, a specific updo she'd learned from a productions hair designer 12 years ago that required both hands and good mirrors and resulted in something that read as professional but took more skill than it appeared. She wore her grandmother's earrings, the only jewelry she owned that she never pawned during the lean years of her 20s, dark red garnets in a gold setting that was simple and old and hers. When the car arrived at 6 p.m. and she went down and got in, the driver, a different man than Gareth, larger, with the specific stillness of someone whose professional task was vigilance, looked at her once in the rearview mirror and then kept his eyes on the road. Cassian was at the destination when she arrived. A private estate on the outer edge of the Upper East Side, a townhouse that had been expanded and extensively renovated until it was something that could have been a restaurant or a museum. Except it wasn't, it was someone's house, and the someone who lived in it had invited 11 other people for dinner who collectively had the capacity to make very serious things happen. He was standing at the bottom of the entrance steps when the car door opened. She stepped out. She watched him see her. He was a controlled man. She'd established that much in the limited time she'd known him. He processed things inwardly, expressed them minimally, kept whatever evaluation he was running largely private. But there was a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, where something moved in his face that he didn't entirely manage to prevent. She filed it away in the same part of her mind where she kept staging notes and blocking revisions and the 100 small observations that added up to understanding a production's interior life. He offered his arm. She took it, which was easier than she'd expected. The physical architecture of it was simple. His forearm solid under her hand, his pace calibrated to hers as they went up the steps, and he leaned very slightly toward her as they approached the door, the way that people did when the person beside them was someone they'd been beside before. "Ready?" he said. Low, only for her. "I'm always ready," she said. "I just like to assess the stage first." He almost smiled. They went in. The dining room was a set designer's fever dream. 20-foot ceilings, dark paneling, 3 chandeliers with actual candles supplemented by hidden lighting that created a warm amber environment with deliberate shadow at the room's edges. 12 place settings on a table that was probably worth more than her apartment. 7 guests already present when they entered, 3 more arriving behind them, and at the far end of the room, standing near the fireplace with a glass of something he wasn't drinking, Dominic Sabo. He was smaller than she'd expected from the file. Compact, white-haired, wearing a suit that was 10 years out of fashion in a way that said, "I stopped caring about this, and I want you to know it." His face had the specific texture of a man who had spent considerable time in weather. Not the weathered quality of outdoor labor, but the weathered quality of sustained, prolonged pressure, the kind that didn't show up on any particular day but accumulated across decades into something that looked, at a certain angle, like absolute solidity. He saw them come in. She felt his attention like a change in room temperature. Cassian guided them toward him. The room did what rooms did when the person who owned the space moved through it. A subtle reorientation, the way other conversations quieted slightly without stopping, the way bodies adjusted without appearing to adjust. "Dominic!" Cassian's voice was easy, comfortable. He'd learned the materials, she thought. "Cassian?" The old man's voice was accented, Eastern European in origin, worn smooth at the edges. He looked at Marin, not at Cassian. Marin met his eyes. "This is Marin," Cassian said. "My wife." She said the word before Cassian could add anything. "He calls me that like he's still surprised I said yes." She extended her hand. "Marin Reeves. It's good to finally be here in person. Cassian's told me enough about you that I feel like I've owed you a proper introduction for some time." Sabo took her hand. His grip was careful, the grip of an old man who knew his own strength and had decided not to demonstrate it. He was still studying her with those dark, patient eyes. "What has he told you?" he said. "That you don't suffer fools, which I respect. That you've built things that lasted, which I respect more. And that this dinner matters. Which is why I'm here in this dress instead of finishing the Act 2 notes I owe my theater director by Monday." She said it without self-deprecation, without apology. Not bragging, just stating, "This is what I do. This is what I set aside to be here. Here's what that means." Sabo blinked. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "Theater," he said. "Broadway wardrobe. 15 years. Currently mid-run on 2 shows." She tilted her head slightly. "I understand you had a background in textiles early on." His eyebrows rose. "Your husband told you this? The textile industry in your region in that decade was—" "I did some reading." She shrugged, a half gesture, comfortable. "Fabric is fabric. I'm always curious about the manufacturing end." The old man looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Cassian. Cassian looked back at him with the expression of a man who had been living with this for 8 years and found it consistently, specifically remarkable. "Come," Sabo said to Marin. "I want to hear about this theater." She went with him toward the fireplace, and as she did, she felt Cassian behind her with an attention that was different from his usual calibrated vigilance. Something looser, she thought. Something that didn't know quite what to do with itself. She didn't look back. Didn't need to. By the time dinner was served, she had learned 3 things that the files hadn't told her. Sabo's nephew Brendan, 28, present at the near end of the table, wearing a good suit he kept pulling at the collar of, had been placed between 2 of the older associates and seemed, under a social reading, to be slightly out of phase with the rest of the room. Not nervous exactly. Displaced, maybe. Like someone who was marking time until something else happened. She noted this and moved on. The second thing, the catering staff had a specific internal choreography that she observed between the soup course and the fish course, which she observed because choreography was professionally visible to her the way grammar was visible to an editor, and one of the servers was slightly off the pattern. His positioning during the bread service was half a step removed from where it should have been for a banquet-trained professional. He recovered quickly and no one else appeared to notice, but she noticed, and she filed it. The third thing, Cassian, when he thought no one was watching him watch her, watched her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the careful evaluation she was accustomed to from him. Something less guarded than that. Something that looked, from her peripheral observation, like a man realizing he was enjoying himself and not entirely knowing what to do about it. The table conversation moved through its courses. Business adjacent, but not direct. The way these things apparently worked, the agreement circling without being landed on, warmed up, and built toward. She held her end of multiple conversations without visible effort, drawing on 15 years of talking to everyone from set builders to opening night sponsors to the very rich friends of board members who came backstage and needed to be managed gracefully. When Brendan Sabo, from down the table, said something, meant to be a joke but landing with an edge, about whether Broadway was still relevant now that people consumed content differently, Marin set down her fork. "Do you know what a live audience can do that a screen can't?" she said. Not aggressive. Conversational. The whole table had gone slightly attentive, the way tables did when something interesting was starting. Brendan smiled, easy, underestimating. "Enlighten me." "They breathe together," she said. "About 40 minutes into a really good show it happens. You can't engineer it and you can't predict which night it'll be. It's just suddenly there. 2,000 people breathing at the same pace, held in the same moment, none of them choosing to. Every screen in the world can't do that. That's why it's still relevant." She picked her fork back up. "But it's a good question. I get it every few years from someone who's never stood in the wings during a full house and felt it." Down the table, Dominic Sabo was watching her with something new in his expression. She didn't look at him directly. She didn't need to. One of the older associates, she'd placed him as Hartley from the files, a silver-haired man with a precise British accent who controlled things in London that the file had been vague about, said quietly, "She's right, you know, about the breathing." Brendan Sabo pulled at his collar again. The fish course arrived. And Marin, fork raised, eye tracking the room with the automatic attention she'd never been able to fully turn off, noticed that the off-pattern server from the bread service had repositioned himself. He was near the far end of the room now, near the antique credenza along the east wall, and his body angle had changed in a way that resolved, when she identified it, into something she understood from 15 years of blocking rehearsals and sightline management. He was positioning himself for a line of sight. She looked at his hands. He'd shifted the tray. His grip was too tight. His shoes were wrong. She'd registered this earlier without consciously processing it, the unconscious part of her mind that collected visual information like an ongoing inventory had filed it, and now it surfaced. Tactical footwear, lightweight, composite sole, the kind of shoe you chose if you needed to move fast and silently across varied surfaces. Not a catering uniform shoe, not a professional server who'd put on his work shoes that morning. Her heart rate changed. Very little. She was, by professional training, very good at not showing internal response externally. But the information rearranged itself into something that stopped being an observation and became a decision. She had approximately 2 seconds. She took them. "Down," was what she said. Not screamed, not whispered, the specific projected command voice she'd used in 3 separate backstage emergencies over 15 years when she'd needed to move people immediately without creating a panic. And she was already moving as she said it, pushing back from the table with both hands and grabbing the edge and pulling, and the massive table tipped with the horrible grinding momentum of a very heavy thing given direction, crystal and glassware, and the remnants of 2 courses cascading and crashing, and she went over the top of it as it fell because she was already moving and her body had made the calculation her mind was still catching up to. The shot sounded like something had been snapped very hard inside a sealed room. The window behind where she'd been sitting starred and went dark. Another shot, then the lights went out entirely, and in the darkness she heard Cassian's voice, close, too close, the unmistakable grip of his hand on her arm. "I have you," he said. She was on the floor. Her shoulder hurt where she'd hit the fallen table. The crimson silk had survived. She noted this with the detached professionalism of someone who had spent 15 years caring about fabric. "The server," she said. "East wall. He's—" "I know," Cassian said. "Stay down." She did not stay down, but she did stay low, which seemed like a reasonable compromise. The room reorganized itself in the dark, the way that rooms reorganized when the people inside them were capable of rapid, practiced response. Sounds of movement, the particular quality of professionals deploying, a brief struggle somewhere near the east wall, then quiet of a very specific variety. 30 seconds, maybe less. The lights came back on. Dominic Sabo was still seated at his end of the table. He hadn't moved. He He was sitting in his chair with the careful stillness of a man who had been through rooms that went wrong before and knew that the worst thing you could do was get in the way of the people whose job it was to handle it. He was looking at Marin. She was standing now, one hand on the overturned table edge for balance, her hair partially out of its arrangement, her shoulder aching. The dress, miraculously, was intact. The garnets were still in her ears. She looked back at Sabo. The old man's expression was one she would think about later. Not gratitude exactly, and not shock, though both of those were probably in there somewhere. It was more like the expression of a man updating a calculation he'd thought was already finished. "The shoes," he said. "You saw the shoes. And the triangle and the sight line." She let go of the table edge. Her hands were steady. "Occupational hazard. I notice when people aren't wearing the right costume for their role." Sabo was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Cassian. "Sign the papers in the morning," he said, "and keep her." Cassian stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, which was information she hadn't asked for, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. And Marin Holloway, wardrobe supervisor, in a crimson gown she'd built with her own hands, in a room that smelled like gunpowder and overturned wine, felt the specific and very inconvenient sensation of something beginning that she had not accounted for in any version of the contract she had written. The room outside was already moving. Cassian's people were managing the aftermath. Sabo was speaking quietly to Hartley at the far end of the table. And Brendan Sabo, the nephew, the displaced one, the man who had been pulling at his collar all night, was gone. She looked at the empty chair. She looked at the angle of the east wall where the server had been. She looked at the seating chart in her memory, the way the positions had been arranged, the table's orientation, the specific arc of the sight line that would have given the shooter his window. It hadn't been random. Someone had set it up in advance. Someone who knew the room, the seating arrangement, the positions of every guest. Someone who'd had access to the planning details well before any server was hired. She looked at the empty chair again. The contract in her pocket felt heavier than it had this morning. Whatever Sunday was going to look like, it was not going to look like what she'd planned. The empty chair was still there when Cassian pulled her into the corridor. He moved fast for a man who'd just watched his dining room get shot up, hand firm at her elbow, not gripping, not dragging, but present in a way that communicated this direction, now without requiring her to decide. She went. The corridor was all dark wood and low sconces and the muffled quality of a space built to absorb sound. And Cassian took her to a room at the end of it that turned out to be a study, closed the door behind them, and let go of her arm. She turned around. "Brendan Sabo," she said. He was already at the window, checking the street below with the automatic caution of someone who'd spent years knowing where the exits were. He didn't answer immediately. "Cassian?" "I heard you." He stepped back from the window. His face was controlled in the specific way of a man burning fuel at a very high rate to keep it that way. "I don't know yet." "The sightline was set," she said. "Someone placed those seats. The server couldn't have found that angle without knowing the room layout in advance. And Brendan was positioned exactly where he needed to be to have a clear sight of the whole table. Not to be targeted. To watch. You map the sightline from the floor of a room in the middle of an assassination attempt. I map sightlines constantly. It's involuntary at this point. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck, checking her own pulse without thinking about it. Elevated, but not unreasonably. He was gone before the lights came back on. That's not how a guest behaves when shots are fired. Cassian was looking at her with that particular quality of attention he had, full and still and slightly unnerving. How long did you know something was wrong? I noticed the server during the bread course. I didn't know what I was noticing yet. By the fish course, I'd identified the shoes and the tray positioning and the sight line. She paused. About 90 seconds of processing time between identification and action. 90 seconds. I was still deciding if I was reading it right. And if you'd been wrong? Then I knocked over a very expensive table and ruined dinner. She said it flatly. That was an acceptable risk compared to the alternative. He looked at her for another moment. One of those moments where she could almost see the interior workings of him shifting, recalibrating, updating files, and then he turned away. Sit down, he said. I don't need to sit down. Your shoulder hit the table edge. You're favoring it. She looked at her own posture and found, with some irritation, that he was right. She sat down on the edge of the leather chair nearest her, which was the compromise between sitting down and admitting she needed to. Cassian crossed the room and opened a cabinet that turned out to contain a medical kit alongside the decanter she'd assumed was its only purpose. He brought the kit over, crouched in front of her without ceremony, and said, "Which shoulder?" "Left. It's not serious." He examined it without touching it first. The same looking before doing qualities she'd noticed in how he handled information, how he handled rooms. Then he pressed 2 fingers to the joint, and she made a sound she hadn't intended to make. "Not dislocated," he said. "I know it's not dislocated. I've dislocated it before. This is bruised." "You've dislocated your shoulder before." "Occupational hazard. Heavy garment racks." She pulled back slightly, and he let her. "I'm fine." He stood and returned the kit to the cabinet and then stood with his back to her for a moment, hands on the cabinet surface. And she had the sense he was doing something she'd seen theater directors do after a catastrophic technical failure. The specific 2-second pause that was about resetting rather than composure, because composure was already there, and what was needed was reorientation. "Szabo will want a meeting tomorrow morning before the signing," he said. "I know. He's going to ask questions about tonight that I don't have full answers to yet. Then we find the full answers tonight." She stood. The shoulder complained, and she told it to manage. "Where is your security lead right now?" "Dealing with the situation in the dining room." "I need to talk to him." Cassian turned around. "Why?" "Because the server had accomplices, or he didn't, and the difference matters for how I talk to Szabo in the morning. And because I need to know how Brendan Szabo got out of this building without being stopped, which means I need to know what your security's coverage of the exits looked like." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I need to make tomorrow work." That was part of the agreement. A beat. 2. "His name is Voss," Cassian said. "I'll take you to him." Doesn't. Voss was in the basement level of the townhouse, which turned out to be something substantially more operational than the upstairs suggested. A room with monitors and equipment and the specific fluorescent utilitarian quality of a space that was purely functional, no aesthetics required. He was a large man, 40-something, with a face that looked like it had been rearranged at some point and set back roughly in the original position. He was on a phone call when they came in, and he ended it without ceremony when he saw Cassian. He looked at Marin. "She stays," Cassian said before Voss could make the decision himself. Voss filed that away with the practiced neutrality of a man who'd learned that filing things away was sometimes the entire job. "The shooter was solo," he said. No support in the room. He had a secondary exit route through the kitchen service corridor. Our coverage on that corridor was pulled 40 minutes before dinner service. "Pulled by who?" Marin said. Voss looked at her with the evaluating quality of someone deciding how much of his professional process he was going to make visible to a stranger. She held his gaze and waited. "Override came from the interior planning contact," he said. "Someone with access to the event layout. Coverage was reassigned to the main entrance, which left the east wall approach unmonitored. For 40 minutes. Yes, and Brendan Szabo exited through west stairwell before we had the floor locked." Voss's jaw was tight. She could see it in the way the muscle moved. It was fast. He knew exactly where to go. "Because he planned exactly where to go," she said. "He's not an improviser. The override on your coverage, the server's positioning, his own exit route. Those are staged elements." "That's a production." She turned to Cassian. "Someone gave him the operational details. Floor plan, coverage schedule, seating arrangement, exit timing. This wasn't sourced from the outside." Cassian was very still. "How many people had access to the full event layout?" she said. Voss answered because Cassian didn't. 6. Narrow it. "I'm working on it." Voss's voice had the clipped quality of a man who did not enjoy being told to do things he was already doing. "I know you are. I'm asking how long it takes." A silence that had weight in it. "By morning," Voss said. "Good." She looked at Cassian. "We need to be in front of Szabo before he asks about this himself. If he reaches out to us, we're behind it. If we reach out to him, we're managing it." Cassian looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression that she was beginning to identify as the specific look of a man who was accustomed to being the most prepared person in any given room and was currently not that person. Agreed, he said. But it was past midnight when they left the townhouse. The car took them back toward Midtown, not toward her apartment because there was a conversation that needed to happen, and Cassian had apparently made the decision that it needed to happen in the car. He sat across from her. It was a large vehicle, black, the kind with backward-facing seats, and looked out the window for the first 3 minutes of the drive. She let him. She'd worked with enough directors to know when someone was composing. I need to tell you something, he said. All right. When I put together the guest list for this event, the original draft, Brendan's name wasn't on it. He turned from the window. Szabo added him 10 days ago, personally requested his inclusion. So Szabo wanted him there. Szabo wanted him there as a show of family continuity. The nephew participates in the business. It demonstrates the next generation is invested. It's a piece of the theater of these kinds of events. He paused. I accepted the addition without pushing back. I shouldn't have. The streetlights moved across his face in intervals, light and shadow, the city's rhythmic syntax. Why didn't you yet? She said. Because pushing back on Szabo's family decisions is a specific kind of mistake. You question his blood, you question his judgment. You're out. He said it without self-pity, just as information. It was the conservative play. And the conservative play almost got him killed. A quiet that had a different texture to it. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like the quiet of two people sitting in the actual size of something. Yes, he said. She looked out the window on her side. The city at this hour had a different quality than the city at any other hour. Stripped back, the performance of daytime removed, just the structures and the lights and the occasional solitary person moving through the frame with their own private urgency. If Brendan set this up, she said, he wasn't trying to kill Cassian. No. Szabo was the target. She turned back to him. Which means this wasn't about your business deal. This was about inheritance. Yes. Have you told Szabo? Not yet. He's going to know by morning regardless. He has his own people and they're going to pull the same threads Voss is pulling. She paused. Do you know what he'll do when he finds out his nephew tried to have him killed? Cassian's face was very level. I have some ideas. None of them involve the police. None of them. She exhaled through her nose. Outside, rain had started again. The same committed November rain from earlier in the week, apparently not finished with what it had to say. The wipers moved in their steady arc. The signing happens tomorrow, she said, if Szabo still wants to sign. He'll want to sign more than he did yesterday. His organization just tried to fold on him from the inside. He needs the external alliance more, not less. She thought about the old man's face in the dining room after the table went down. The stillness, the recalculation, the specific expression of a man reordering things. He's going to sign, but he's going to want a conversation first. About you. About what I saw and when I saw it and what I did with it. She looked at Cassian. I'm not a liability in that conversation. I'm the reason it's still possible. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. I want to be in the room. I know. I'm not asking Marin. He said her name the way he'd said it in the practice session, the way she'd instructed him to, comfortable with it, familiar, the particular weight of a word used so often it had developed texture. Except she hadn't told him to say it with that exact quality, and what she was hearing was not something she'd scripted. You'll be in the room. She looked at him. He was looking back at her. Okay, she said. The car moved through the wet streets and she turned back to the window and did not think about the fact that he'd said her name like that. She focused instead on the practical architecture of the morning, what Szabo would ask, what she'd say, what the sequence of the conversation needed to be to arrive at a signed agreement by noon. She focused on Brendan Szabo's empty chair. She focused on the security gap and the staged sightline and the question of who among 6 people had handed Brendan the operational details he'd needed. She did not think about the 2 seconds in the study when Cassian had pressed 2 fingers to her shoulder and she had felt, with the physical clarity of someone who had not been touched with that quality of attention in a long time, exactly where his fingers were. The hotel suite Cassian had arranged for her was on the 32nd floor of a building 6 blocks from the townhouse, which she hadn't known about until Gareth appeared in the lobby with a key card and a bag that contained, as far as she could tell, precisely the items she would have packed if someone had given her 15 minutes and a request for an overnight stay. She didn't ask how Gareth had managed this. She was developing a general policy of not asking Gareth how he managed things. She showered. She hung the crimson gown in the closet with the care she gave all good garments regardless of circumstance. She sat on the edge of the bed in the hotel robe and looked at her phone and thought about calling Priya and then decided that was a problem for morning. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not Cassian's, not Gareth's. She answered. Ms. Holloway. The voice was male, young, and doing something with its composure that she recognized from working with inexperienced actors, pressing down on something underneath. She said nothing and waited. You need to understand that what happened tonight was not intended to involve you. Brendan Sabo's voice, stripped of the easy social register she'd observed at dinner. You were not part of this. And yet here I am. My uncle... A pause. The sound of him breathing through something. He's not what you've been told. The alliance your husband is building, you don't know what you're helping to construct. Mr. Sabo. She kept her voice very level. You tried to have your uncle killed tonight in a room full of people. Whatever you believe about your justification, that's the action I have information about. Not your uncle's history, not what the alliance means. What you did tonight. I need you to understand. What do you need me to do with that understanding? Not contact security? Not tell your uncle? Not tell my husband? She paused. You called me because you thought I was the weakest point, that I'm new enough to this, outside enough to this that I might be manageable. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped, actually. That was a mistake in your threat assessment. Silence. You have no idea what Cassian Reeves is, Brendan said. The social register was fully gone now. What was left was younger and uglier and more afraid than she'd expected. You've known him 5 days. You're playing a role. Then why are you calling me? A longer silence. Because you're the only person in that room tonight who acted without calculating what it cost them first, he said. You just moved. She sat with that for a moment. Where are you? She said. Somewhere safe. For how long? Long enough. His breath came slightly unsteady now. Whatever had been holding the composure was running out of fuel. I need you to tell my uncle something. Tell him I know about Kelson. He'll understand. The call ended. Marin sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the name she'd written automatically in the corner of the notepad on the nightstand. Kelson. Her handwriting, even in the middle of the night after a near-miss assassination, was precise and legible, the writing of someone who'd spent years annotating production scripts in small margins. She looked at the name. She picked up her phone and called Cassian. He answered on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. Brendan called me, she said. The quality of the silence on his end changed with a specificity she could identify even over a phone line. He said to tell Sabo he knows about Kelson, she said. He said Sabo would understand. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. She counted. Say it again, Cassian said. Kelson, Kelsin. He was very clear he wanted that communicated. She looked at the notepad. What is it? Another pause, shorter. A place, Cassian said. It's the name of a place. His voice was doing something she hadn't heard from it before. Not losing control, never that, but the edges of the controlled exterior had shifted, the way a building looked when something structural had moved. Cassian. Go to sleep, he said. Lock the door. Voss has someone in the corridor. I'll be there at 7. What does it mean, Kelson? It means the morning is more complicated than I told you it was. A beat. I'll explain at 7. He ended the call. She put the phone down, looked at the notepad. At the name that had changed the quality of Cassian Reeves's voice in a way she hadn't thought was possible, she looked at the locked door of the hotel suite, at the window with its 32nd floor view of the rain-wet city, the lights below doing their ordinary patient work of making the darkness navigable. She had agreed to 20 hours. She had been awake for 19 of them. And for the first time since she'd walked into a Park Avenue penthouse 5 days ago with a costume repair kit and a practiced aversion to intimidation, Maren Holloway felt the specific and unfamiliar sensation of being inside something she did not know the full shape of, something that had edges she hadn't mapped yet, in territory where her usual skills were necessary but not sufficient, where the script she'd written with such precision was encountering a version of the room it had not accounted for. She did not sleep. She sat in the chair by the window, notepad in her lap, and wrote down everything she knew, everything she'd observed, every detail she'd cataloged from the moment she'd walked into the townhouse, because that was what she did when the production went sideways. You went back to the materials, all the way back, and you looked at them until the piece you'd missed made itself visible. By 5 a.m., she had 4 pages of notes and a headache, and the very clear and deeply inconvenient understanding that Brendan Sabo had not called her because he thought she was weak. He had called her because he thought she was the only person who might listen to him before Cassian Reeves decided what to do with the information he'd just been handed. The door knocked at 7 exactly. She opened it. Cassian was there in a different suit than last night, clean and assembled, but his face had the quality of a man who'd done his sleeping in a chair and didn't intend to discuss it. He looked at her, at the notepad in her hand, at the 4 pages visible through the door, and he said nothing for a moment. Then, "Kelson is a name," he said, "not a place." He came in. She stepped back. "It's the name Sabo's first wife used, the one who died 22 years ago." He looked at the window, at the city below going about its morning. She didn't die. Sabo had her disappeared, and Brendan Sabo is not his nephew. The rain had finally stopped. The city outside was doing what it always did, continuing indifferent to whatever was happening inside any given room, and the light coming through the window was the specific gray of a November morning that hadn't decided yet what it intended to become. Maren looked at Cassian. "He's the son," she said. "Yes." "Sabo's son, by the wife Sabo erased." "Yes." She let out a slow breath. "And Sabo doesn't know." Cassian's jaw moved. "Sabo has always known exactly who Brendan is. He kept him close." A pause. "That's what he does with things he wants to control." The room felt smaller than it had 30 seconds ago. The 4 pages of notes in her hand felt like evidence of a wrong assumption. She'd been building a picture, and the picture had been accurate as far as it went, but it hadn't gone far enough, and now the full picture was visible, and it was substantially darker and more layered than anything she'd put on paper. She looked at Cassian. He was watching her process it with the specific quality he had: full attention, no rush, the patience of a man who understood that some information needed space to land before the next thing could begin. "He told me to tell Sabo," she said. "He knew that telling me meant you'd find out and you'd tell Sabo." "Yes." So he wanted Sabo to know that he knows, not as a threat, as leverage, as protection. She looked at the notepad. If Sabo knows that Brendan knows about Kelson, about what was done to his mother, if that's now on the table, then killing him becomes a different calculation, Cassian said, because whatever Brendan knows, he's presumably arranged for it to come out if something happens to him. "He's not trying to take his father down," she said slowly. "He was trying to remove him. Last night, the assassination attempt, it wasn't about inheritance or power. He was trying to get out from under him." Cassian looked at her. "He's been under that man's thumb his entire life," she said, "living as the nephew, knowing what happened to his mother, knowing Sabo knows exactly who he is and keeps him there." She stopped herself, looked at the window. "That's not a business dispute. That's a different thing entirely." "Maren," Cassian's voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. "Whatever it is, I know." She turned back to him. Her voice was level. She made sure of that. "It doesn't change what we need to do in that room in 2 hours. It changes why we're doing it. She held up the notepad. And it means the signing isn't the end of this. Whatever agreement you reach with Sabo this morning, you're walking into a structure that has this input, that changes what it's worth. Cassian was very still. Yes, he said. It does. She looked at him, at his face in the gray morning light, at the man she had known for 5 days and built 8 years of fiction around, and she felt the contract in her pocket, the real one, the $2 million document with her terms, for the first time since she'd signed it as something other than a transaction. The morning was waiting. Sabo was waiting. And somewhere in the city, Brendan Sabo was waiting to find out if anyone was going to make a different choice than the ones that had been made in Kelson 22 years ago, when a woman who knew too much had been made to disappear. Marin finished the sentence in her own head and set the notepad down on the table. We have 90 minutes, she said. Tell me everything you know about Kelson, not the summary, everything. Cassian looked at her. Sit down, she said. He sat. He talked for 40 minutes. She didn't interrupt. She sat in the chair across from him with the notepad on her knee, and she wrote, not everything. She wrote the load-bearing pieces, the structural details that held the rest of it up, because 40 minutes of information was too much to carry whole, and she'd learned long ago that the way to handle density was to find the skeleton underneath it. The skeleton of Kelson was this. 23 years ago, Dominic Sabo had a wife named Carla, not the wife the public record showed. That was the second marriage, to a woman named Helena, who had died of an illness 8 years into the marriage, and whose death was documented and verifiable and entirely real. Carla was before Helena. Carla was before the empire reached its current shape, when Sabo was building rather than maintaining, and Carla had the specific misfortune of being both deeply loved and deeply observant, which in Sabo's world was a combination that eventually became untenable. She had seen things. She had kept records. Not out of malice, or so Brendan believed, and Brendan had spent 23 years assembling the picture from fragments, but out of the instinct of a woman who understood she was living inside something that could turn on her. Insurance, the oldest domestic calculation in the world. When Sabo found the records, he did not destroy them. He destroyed the possibility of her using them. Carla was relocated. Not killed, Sabo was sentimental in the specific way of powerful men who reserved one thing they couldn't be rational about, and Carla had been that thing. She was moved to a house in a coastal town 3 hours from the city, with a new name and sufficient money, and the understanding, communicated once and not revisited, that the child she was carrying would be raised in Sabo's organization under Sabo's terms. Contact between them was prohibited. Her name was removed from every document. The child was Brendan. Brendan had grown up knowing his father was Dominic Sabo. He had not grown up knowing his mother was alive. He'd been told she'd died in childbirth, which was the story Sabo had given his own associates, and which Brendan had believed until he was 19 and found, in a box of his deceased aunt's personal effects, a letter postmarked from a town he didn't recognize, in handwriting he didn't know, that said, "Tell him I think about him every day," and was signed with a name he'd never heard. It had taken him 4 years to find her, another 2 to make contact in a way that didn't alert Sabo. In that time, he'd been doing exactly what Sabo wanted, learning the business, attending the meetings, performing the role of loyal nephew, and building, piece by piece, an exit. Last night was supposed to be the exit. He wasn't trying to kill Sabo, Marin said. She'd known this since the hotel room, but hearing the full picture confirmed it with a different weight. He was trying to get leverage. The attempt on Sabo's life, it was a demonstration. I can reach you. Now let my mother go. That's my read, Cassian said. And the shooter, the server, was supposed to miss. Cassian's jaw was tight. Brendan's calculation was a warning shot, a controlled panic, and a negotiating position. What he didn't account for was that the shooter decided that if he was already in the room, he stopped. He went freelance, she said. Someone paid him more than Brendan did, for the real outcome. She looked at the notepad, at the name Kelson, at the skeleton of a story that had more rooms in it than she'd understood when she walked in. "Who paid the shooter?" she said. "That's what Voss is working on." He paused. "And that's what I need to know before I'm in front of Sabo in—" He checked his watch. 70 minutes. Marin stood. She went to the window and stood there with her arms crossed, looking down at the street below, at the ordinary morning machinery of the city running its course. "Sabo knows Brendan is his son," she said. "Brendan knows Sabo knows. Sabo thinks Brendan tried to kill him as a power play. He doesn't know it was a warning, a leverage move. He thinks it was a straight attempt." She turned. "If you walk into that room without correcting that understanding, Sabo signs the agreement and then he deals with Brendan the only way he knows how to deal with threats." "Yes." "And Brendan is 23 years of a woman named Carla waiting to find out if her son survives the morning." Cassian looked at her. His face was doing the thing it did when she'd said something he hadn't prepared a response to. "That's not our problem," he said. "Not cruel, just stating the boundary of what they were here to do." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. But she turned back to the window, and the set of her shoulders said something different than what she'd agreed to, and he let it sit there without addressing it, which was the first time she'd seen him deliberately not press something. Her phone buzzed on the table. She crossed to it. "Voss." A text, not a call. "Need you both here, now, not the meeting location. The car is outside." She showed Cassian the screen. His face did something very controlled. "Get dressed," he said. But Voss was in the same basement room as the night before, but the quality of the room had changed. 2 additional men she hadn't seen before were present, both with the same specific stillness as Voss, and there was a laptop open on the table with something on it that Voss turned toward them when they came in. "The shooter's ID," Voss said. "We ran everything we could find, and his last known employer was a private security contractor based in Brussels. Standard for hire operation. They don't take political jobs, they don't take domestic, they take commercial." He looked at Cassian. "The contracting entity for last night's job was routed through 3 shells. Third shell traces back to a holding company registered in the name of Elias Kern." The name hit the room differently than names usually did. She could see it in the way Cassian went still. Not his usual stillness, the professional composure she'd cataloged, but something underneath that, something older. "Say it again," Cassian said. "Elias Kern." Voss held his gaze. "I know what that name means." She didn't know what it meant. She looked at Cassian. His face was a surface with no information on it, which was, she'd learned in the past 5 days, itself a specific kind of information. "Who is Elias Kern?" she said. Nobody answered immediately. "Someone tell me who Elias Kern is," she said. "Right now, not in a minute. Now." Voss looked at Cassian. Cassian looked at the laptop. "He was my second," Cassian said. His voice had the quality of someone reading from a document in a language they were still processing. "For 11 years, he built the operational side of my organization from the ground up. He left 4 years ago under an arrangement. He was compensated. He relocated. We had an understanding." A pause. "He relocated to Brussels." She stood with this information for exactly as long as it took to understand it fully. "He's not trying to hit Sabo," she said. "No," Cassian said. "The Sabo alliance, if it goes through, it consolidates your position. It removes the gaps in your network that Kern would know about. It closes every door he's been using." She looked at Cassian. "Kern isn't at war with Sabo. He's at war with you. Last night wasn't about Sabo. It was supposed to look like it was about Sabo. And if the old man dies at a dinner where I'm the host, you're not just implicated, you're finished." The shape of it assembled itself with the terrible clarity of a set design snapping into place. The alliance collapses. Your credibility with every partner you have collapses. You spend the next 2 years proving you didn't order it instead of building anything. Cassian said nothing. He was looking at the laptop. "He used Brendan," she said. "Brendan had his own plan, said the warning shot, the leverage play, but Kern found out about it, or manufactured it, or both." She thought about it. "He paid the shooter to turn Brendan's warning into a real attempt. So Brendan goes down for it, Sabo's people spend their energy on the nephew, and the actual architect walks away clean. Voss was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him, something that looked around the edges like reassessment. "That's the read," Voss said. Not conceding it to her, just confirming that the lines matched. Cassian turned from the laptop. He looked at Marin with an expression she hadn't seen from him in the 5 days she'd known him, and she'd cataloged them carefully, and this one was new. It was the expression of a man who had operated on the assumption that his world had a knowable shape and had just found a room in it he hadn't mapped. "He's been in Brussels for 4 years, Cassian said. I knew there was residual—" He stopped. Started again. "I underestimated." "You trusted," she said, not softening it, not making it easier. "Those aren't the same thing, but they can feel like it." He looked at her. "We have 50 minutes, she said. "Before Sabo." "I know." "Cassian." She waited until he was fully with her. "If you walk into that room and you tell Sabo what we know, about Kern, about Brendan, about the real target, you're handing him information that changes his position completely. He came here to finalize an alliance because it benefited him. If he knows that alliance is what made him a target, he reweights the calculus. He might pull out. Or he might double down because he doesn't want to be seen retreating." She paused. "Which one is he?" Cassian thought for exactly 3 seconds. "He doesn't retreat." "Then tell him everything." "If I tell him Kern is the source, he needs to know that what happened to him last night was engineered by someone inside your world. If you don't tell him, and he finds out later, you've withheld information about an attempt on his life. That ends the alliance, and probably more than that." She held his eyes. "You don't have a version of this morning where you protect information. You only have the version where you give him everything and let him decide." The room was quiet. The 2 men she didn't know were looking at Cassian. Voss was looking at Marin. "She's right," Voss said. It was the first thing Voss had said that was a position rather than a report. Cassian looked at him, looked at her, looked at the window, which in the basement showed nothing. A ground-level rectangle of November sidewalk and passing feet. "All right," he said. The meeting with Sabo was in a different location than the townhouse, a private floor of a hotel 6 blocks away, which said something about how Sabo operated after a security failure. You didn't return to the compromised space. You moved. You forced the other side to find you. They were taken up by a private elevator and walked into a room where Sabo was already seated at a round table with Hartley on his right and a man she hadn't seen the night before on his left, compact and gray-haired and with the quality of someone who handled things that weren't discussed in mixed company. There was no food on the table, no coffee. The deliberate absence of hospitality said everything about where Sabo had placed this conversation. She sat beside Cassian. He hadn't asked her to stay back, and she hadn't offered to. Sabo looked at her first, then at Cassian. "Tell me," Sabo said. Cassian told him, all of it. He was precise and unhurried, and he didn't soften the parts that reflected badly on his own intelligence, which she watched Sabo track with the careful attention of a man measuring not just the information, but the quality of the delivery. She directed enough performances to recognize when someone was being evaluated on form as much as content. When Cassian finished, Sabo was quiet for a long time. "Kern," he said. "Yes." "I know the name," Sabo said. Cassian waited. "He came to me 8 months ago." Sabo's voice was level, entirely level, the way things were level when there was a great deal of weight pressing down on them from above. "He proposed an arrangement, an alternative to the alliance you were offering, less formal, less consolidated, more—" a pause. "Flexible." She watched Cassian absorb this. "You declined," Cassian said. Not a question. "I declined." Sabo's eyes moved to the window. "Because flexible arrangements require trust, and I didn't know him. And because consolidated is what I've built my entire life working toward, and a man who offers me something less than that is offering me a step backward." He looked back at Cassian. "I didn't tell you because it didn't seem relevant. He was a minor figure making a secondary pitch. I dismissed it. And now I understand that the minor figure found another angle." Sabo's jaw moved, just slightly. "He found Brendan." The table was quiet. "Where is my son?" Sabo said. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Nobody reacted to it, or nobody performed a reaction, which was different, and the difference was that everyone in the room already knew and had been waiting to see how it was named. "We don't know his exact location," Cassian said. "He made contact last night, after the event. He's mobile it." "He's afraid," Sabo said. "Not with contempt, with something more complicated than that." "He has reason to be," Cassian said carefully. Sabo looked at him. Something moved through the old man's face, not the surface of it, not any feature individually, but the whole of it, the way weather moved through a landscape. It was there, and then it was contained, and the surface was smooth again. "He tried to have me killed," Sabo said. "He tried to send a message," Marin said. Every head in the room turned to her. She hadn't planned to speak. The words had just found the space. Sabo looked at her. "He wasn't trying to kill you," she said. "He's been trying to get out from under you for years. Last night was leverage, not elimination. The shooter going lethal on us, that wasn't Brendan's design. Someone turned his play into something worse." She kept her voice even. "He called me at 2 in the morning to make sure you knew about Kelson. That's not what a man does when he wants his father dead. That's what a man does when he wants to stop being invisible." The room was very still. Sabo's eyes stayed on her face. She held them. She was a woman who had spent 15 years in rooms where things were being decided and had learned that looking away in those moments cost you more than whatever you thought you were protecting. "You know about Kelson," Sabo said. "I know Carla is alive," she said. "I know Brendan knows, and I know that's the first time in 23 years that name has been in this room and not been a threat." Something happened in Sabo's face. It was not a collapse. The architecture was too solid for that. But something in the foundation shifted, and she saw it, and she was fairly certain Cassian saw it too, and it lasted for approximately 2 seconds before the man reassembled himself into the shape he'd been for the entirety of his adult life. "Leave us," Sabo said. Hartley and the gray-haired man stood and left. The 4 of them remained: Sabo, Cassian, Marin, and the thing Marin had just put on the table that couldn't be taken back. "The Alliance," Sabo said to Cassian. "You still want it." "Yes. Even knowing Kern will treat it as a declaration. Especially knowing that." Sabo looked at Marin. "And you?" She looked back at him. "I'm a wardrobe supervisor from West 44th Street. What I want isn't a variable in this room." "You made it a variable when you opened your mouth 30 seconds ago. Not hostile, just accurate." "Then what I want is for Brendan Sabo to still be alive next week," she said. "And I want the woman in that coastal town to get a phone call from someone who can tell her that her son is all right." She paused. "That's what I want." The room sat with that. Sabo looked at the table's surface. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the quality of the silence changed, from anticipatory to something else. Something that had the texture of a man making a calculation he'd been avoiding for 23 years. "Sign the papers," he said. Cassian exhaled very slowly. She heard it. "And find Kern," Sabo said. His voice had changed. The level quality was still there, but something had entered it that was colder and more deliberate than anything she'd heard from him before. "When you find him." A pause. "I want to be there." "Understood," Cassian said. Sabo stood. He was small and compact and white-haired and had the specific gravity of something very old and very dense, and as he stood he looked at Marin one more time. "Brendan's mother," he said. "She liked the theater." He walked out of the room. The papers were signed at 11:42 a.m. in an anteroom off the main floor, with Hartley and Voss as witnesses and nobody saying more than was necessary. Cassian signed, Sabo signed. Hands were not shaken. She stood near the window and watched. Afterward, in the elevator going down, Cassian stood beside her and didn't speak, and she didn't speak, and when the doors opened to the lobby, he said, "Come with me," and she went. The car was outside. They got in. It didn't go toward her hotel or toward her apartment on the Upper West Side. It moved through mid-morning traffic with the patient efficiency of a car that went wherever it was directed. And after 6 blocks, she said, "Where are we going?" "My building," he said. "I need you where I can—" He stopped. "Where you can what?" "Where I can be certain you're not accessible." He looked at her. "Kern knows about you. He knew the event, the seating, the coverage. He knew you were going to be there, which means he's updated his information since last night." She looked at him. "He'll know what you did," Cassian said. "In that room. And he'll know what happened afterward. And he'll know that you are—" Another stop. "Say it," she said. A variable he didn't account for. His voice was careful. "Which makes you a problem he'll want to address." She sat with this. Outside, the city moved in its indifferent afternoon rhythm, oblivious to the specific shape of her situation. "I had a Bresciano fitting this morning that I missed," she said. "Priya covered it," he said. She stared at him. "How do you know Priya covered it?" "Gareth called her at 6 a.m. "You had Gareth call my assistant." "To cover your schedule?" "Yes." She turned to face him fully, which in the backward-facing seat required a minor physical adjustment. "You arranged my professional life without asking me. I was managing. You were managing me," she said. "Like a variable. Like something you could route around." She watched his face. "That's the thing you do, isn't it? You remove obstacles through resources before the obstacle can address itself. I told you on day 1 that I objected to that." He held her gaze. "You're right," he said. "Not you're overreacting. Not it was necessary. Just, you're right." She looked at him. "Don't do it again," she said. "Noted." The car kept moving. She looked at her hands, at the notepad she was still carrying, at the 4 pages of reconstructed information that had gotten them to a signed agreement that was now the target of a man with 11 years of inside knowledge of Cassian Reeves's operation and an established willingness to engineer complex multi-party situations with other people's lives as the moving pieces. "The contract ends today," she said. "Technically. Sunday afternoon, that was the term." Cassian looked at her. "I know," he said. "The $2 million was transferred this morning. Gareth sent the confirmation at 8. "I know," he said again. She looked at the contract in her memory. The terms she'd written, the conditions she'd named, the clean arithmetic of the exchange. $2 million, 1 weekend, then separate lives. She'd built 8 years of fiction, and it had done its job. And the job was done. And the sensible thing, the pragmatic, professional, fundamentally Marin Holloway thing, was to take the money, go back to the theater, tell Priya what had happened, and let Cassian Reeves deal with Elias Kern in whatever way men like Cassian Reeves dealt with men like Elias Kern. She looked out the window. They were pulling up to his building on Park Avenue, the same building where 5 days ago she'd ridden a private elevator up 48 floors with her costume kit on her shoulder, irritated and curious and entirely unprepared for any of this. The car stopped. Gareth opened the door. She didn't move. "He'll come after you regardless," she said. "Whether I stay or whether I go, because I'm already in the picture." "Yes," Cassian said. He didn't dress it up. "So my choices are, go home to my apartment and wait to see how Kern decides to address the variable, or—" She looked at the building, at the 48 floors she couldn't see from this angle. "Or I stay inside this and help you find him before he finds either of us." Cassian said nothing. "Those are bad options," she said. "Yes," he said again. She looked at him, at the man she'd known for 5 days and 8 fictional years, at the face that had become, in the compressed intimacy of the past 20 hours, legible to her in the specific way that only faces you studied under pressure became legible. Every controlled surface with its underlying current, every managed expression with its honest signal. She picked up her notepad. She got out of the car. Cassian came out beside her, and they stood on the sidewalk in the November gray, and she said, "I want everything Voss has on Kern's Brussels operation, and I want Brendan Sabo found. Not for his father, for the conversation that hasn't happened yet between a man who's been invisible his whole life and someone who might actually listen to what he knows." She looked up at the building. Because Brendan spent 4 years watching his father operate from the inside, and Kern found him useful for exactly that reason, which means what Brendan knows about Kern's approach, about his methods, About the specific shape of how he thinks. She turned to Cassian. Is the best intelligence you have? Cassian looked at her. You're not leaving, he said. Not a question. I'm renegotiating, she said. The contract ended. I'm writing a new one. He almost smiled. That partial, careful, held-back thing that she had watched form and almost form over 5 days. The almost that was somehow more informative than the complete version would have been. Terms? He said. She looked at him, at the building, at the city behind them doing its relentless ordinary work. I'll tell you when I figure them out, she said, and walked inside, and Cassian Reeves stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the November gray before he followed her in, and somewhere in the city, Elias Kern was looking at information that told him last night had not gone as planned and was beginning to understand that the variable no one had accounted for had just decided to stay in the equation. And in a coastal town 3 hours away, a woman named Carla was living her quiet, careful life under a name that wasn't hers, not yet knowing that the morning had changed the mathematics of everything she'd spent 23 years waiting for. Elias Kern's Brussels file was 43 pages. Marin read it in 2 hours at Cassian's kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold beside her and a second notepad she'd found in a drawer. She read the way she read production scripts, not for the narrative, not for the drama of it, but for the structural logic underneath, the load-bearing elements that everything else was built on. By the time she finished, she had 11 pages of her own notes and a very clear picture of a man who had spent 4 years building something that looked, from the outside, like a legitimate security consulting operation, and looked from the inside like a dismantling project. He hadn't been constructing an empire. He'd been constructing a specific machine, designed for a specific purpose, and the purpose was Cassian Reeves. Voss came in at 2 in the afternoon and sat across from her. You've read it, he said. He's been in contact with every partner Cassian has that operates with independent infrastructure, she said. Not all at once, sequentially. Over 18 months. He's been building a picture of every load-bearing relationship in the network. She turned the notepad to face him. This isn't a hostile takeover. He's not trying to steal the operation. He's trying to make it collapse inward. Voss looked at her notes. If the Sabo alliance falls, it doesn't just fall. It exposes the Eastern Corridor to Sabo's competitors, and those competitors have been waiting. The network folds from the east, and Kern steps in to manage the pieces that are left. She tapped the notepad. He doesn't need to win. He just needs Cassian to lose. Where's Kern now? Not Brussels. The Brussels operation is staffed and running, but he's not there. He's been mobile since... She checked her own notes. Since September, 8 weeks ago. She looked at Voss. Where's Brendan? A pause. We found him an hour ago. He's in Queens, a building Szabo owns under a subsidiary. Brendan knew the property. He's not running, she said. He's waiting. For what? For someone to pick up the phone. Voss looked at her for a moment. You want to bring him in. I want to talk to him, before Szabo's people find him, before Kern finds him, before anyone else decides what to do with him. She closed the notepad. He was inside Kern's approach for months. Kern used him, which means he spoke to him, built a rapport, explained enough to get Brendan's cooperation. Brendan knows how Kern thinks. He knows the texture of it. He tried to have Szabo killed. He tried to send a message that got hijacked. She held Voss's gaze. Those are different things, and you know it. Voss was quiet for 3 seconds. I'll need Cassian's sign-off. I know. Where is he? Downstairs. He's been on calls since we came in. She stood, picked up both notepads, and went downstairs. Cassian was in the room with the architectural models, pacing the length of it with his phone to his ear, speaking in a low, continuous voice that stopped when she came in. He said something brief into the phone and ended the call. Voss found Brendan, she said. I know. I want to go get him. Cassian looked at her. No. He has information about Kern's methodology that isn't in any file. He spent months in direct contact with the man. I know what that is. The answer is still no. She stopped, looked at him. He was doing the controlled thing, the fully managed thing, but under it she could see the fuel burning. He'd been on calls for 2 hours, and whatever the calls had told him had added weight. What happened? She said. He set the phone on the table next to one of the architectural models. Kern has someone inside this building. She went still. Not staff, not security. Someone in the network who has access to the residential systems. He looked at the window. Voss found a surveillance tap on the external communication line. It's been active for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She did the arithmetic. He's been listening since before the Szabo negotiation finalized. Since before I started looking for someone to fill the role you're now filling. His voice was flat. He's heard the Szabo conversations. He's heard the event planning. He heard... A pause. He's heard the past 48 hours. She let the full shape of that land. He knows we have the file, she said. He knows we've read it. He knows we made the connection. Yes. Which means whatever he was planning next, he's accelerating it. Yes. She looked at the architectural models on the table. 3 cities, unfamiliar. Cassian's future plans made physical and miniature and very, very exposed. She thought about 43 pages of a dismantling project. She thought about a man who'd spent 4 years building a machine designed to make Cassian Reeves watch everything he'd constructed fold inward. He'll move tonight, she said. Cassian looked at her. He was already accelerating after last night didn't go as planned. Now he knows we have his operational picture. He's got hours before we can use it effectively, not days. She held his eyes. He'll move tonight. Whatever the next phase is, it happens tonight. Cassian picked up his phone. He called Voss. Get Brendan, he said. Bring him here, now. Brendan Szabo arrived at 4:30 p.m. looking like someone who hadn't slept in 30 hours, which was accurate, and like someone who had spent those 30 hours deciding whether the next person who came through whatever door he was behind was going to be a threat or an exit, which was also accurate. He was younger than he'd looked at dinner. The good suit and the social register had added a decade. Without them, he was 28 and frightened and doing an imperfect job of not showing it. He stopped when he saw Marin. You, he said. Sit down, she said. He sat. Not because she had authority over him. She could see him make the decision, assess her, assess the room, assess that she was the least threatening element present, conclude that sitting was the strategic choice. She recognized the calculation because she'd watched actors make it from the wings. Not compliance, positioning. Cassian was at the window. Voss was by the door. She sat across from Brendan and put both notepads on the table between them. Elias Kern, she said. His face changed. Not dramatically. A tightening around the eyes. A minute adjustment of the jaw. When did he first contact you? She said. Why would I... Brendan. She said it the way she said things when she needed someone to understand she was not performing impatience, she was experiencing it. Kern put a shooter in that room last night and told him to stop missing. You're alive right now because it went wrong before it went right. He used your play and turned it into something you didn't design and can't take back. You called me at 2 in the morning because you needed someone to hear a different version of the story than the one Kern left behind. She leaned forward slightly. I'm listening. Now tell me when he contacted you. Brendan looked at the notepads. At her. At the window where Cassian stood. 14 months ago, he said. How? Through an intermediary. Someone in the Brussels operation who knew my situation. A pause. Who knew who I was? Who Szabo was to me? He swallowed. Kern reached out through him and said he had information about my mother. She kept her face exactly as it was. And? He knew she was alive. He knew where she was. He'd been... Another swallow, harder. He'd been watching her. As leverage. He said he wasn't threatening her, but the message was clear enough. He offered you information about your mother in exchange for access to Szabo's operation, she said. He wanted the internal architecture. How Szabo made decisions. Who the actual power structure was versus the presented one. Things that would take years to source from the outside. Brendan's hands were on the table, flat, the way people positioned their hands when they were trying to control what the rest of their body was doing. I gave him things, structural information, I didn't give him anything that would... You gave him enough to engineer last night, Cassian said from the window. Not loud. Very quiet. The specific quality of quiet that preceded something. Brendan flinched. He told me it was about positioning, about creating space for a negotiation. He said no one would be hurt. And you believe that? Brendan looked at Cassian. I wanted to believe it. He said it with the specific, exhausted flatness of someone who had stopped defending the indefensible and was down to the stripped truth. I wanted it to be the thing that got me out. The room was quiet. She watched Cassian stand at the window and absorb that, absorb the specific human texture of it, which was not the texture of a tactical problem, but the texture of a 28-year-old man who'd been handed an impossible position at birth and had made a desperate choice and gotten it catastrophically wrong. She watched Cassian's jaw move. She watched him not speak for 6 full seconds. Where's Kern now? Cassian said. I don't know. After last night, he went dark. The contact channel went silent. Brendan looked at the table. He didn't need me anymore. She looked at her notes, at the movement pattern she'd traced through the Brussels file, the sequential contact with independent partners, the 18-month timeline, the operational shape of a project in its final phase. He needed access to one more thing, she said, half to herself. She looked at Cassian. The Eastern Corridor. The Partners Sabos Alliance would have consolidated. If those partnerships don't know the alliance went through, Cassian turned from the window fast. They won't know until the announcement, he said, which goes out when? Tonight, 8 p.m. She looked at the clock. 3 hours and 40 minutes. He's going to move before 8, she said. If he can create enough disruption in the Eastern Corridor before the announcement lands, the announcement looks like a response to instability rather than a consolidation of strength. The partners read it as desperation. The alliance looks fragile from the first moment it's public. She stood. He doesn't need to destroy the alliance. He just needs to be the first story about it. Voss's phone went off. He looked at it, looked at Cassian. Eastern Corridor partner in Vilnius, Voss said. Their main facility went offline 20 minutes ago. Unexplained systems failure. The room compressed. It's already started, she said, but the next 90 minutes were the most operationally dense of her life, which was a sentence she hadn't expected to be accurate for a person whose life had been spent in theater. Cassian worked the phones. Voss worked the room. Additional personnel arrived. The basement operations center filled. Screens that had shown 2 or 3 feeds the night before now showed 12. She stayed out of the spaces where she'd be in the way and used the spaces where she wouldn't, which primarily meant the table in the corner with her notepads and a direct sightline to 3 of the screens. She watched the pattern. That was what she did. She watched the pattern, the same way she watched blocking rehearsals, the same way she watched rooms fill and empty and fill again. The Vilnius facility went dark. Then a logistics partner in Warsaw reported an attempted intrusion into their communication systems. Then a financial routing channel that Voss identified from the Brussels file as a key through line in Cassian's Eastern network showed anomalous traffic. Sequential. Fast. Getting faster. She picked up her phone and called a number. Gareth answered. I need you to look at something, she said. The Brussels file. There's a section in pages 31 through 33 about Kern's communication infrastructure. He routes through 3 redundant channels. Voss has 2 of them. She paused. The third one isn't labeled. It's described as legacy infrastructure. Where does it go? A silence while Gareth presumably pulled the file. It's a routing address, Gareth said. Old. Probably predates the Brussels operation. It's a pause. It goes to a property address in New Jersey. She stood up straight. Send it to me, she said. She crossed the room to Voss. I have a location. He asked. He looked at her. How? Legacy routing channel in his communication infrastructure. He's not in Brussels. He's been here. He's been running this from... She looked at her phone as Gareth's text came through and read the address aloud. Voss took out his phone, ran it. His face did the thing it did when information arrived that rearranged other information. That property, he said, is registered to a holding company that traces back to, he looked up, Reeves Capital Group. The room stopped. She heard the words and felt them arrive with the specific physical quality of an impact. Not sharp, but deep. the kind that didn't hurt immediately. That's one of Cassian's entities, she said. Was, Voss said. It was divested 4 years ago, transferred as part of the separation arrangement with... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She finished it. With Kern. Voss nodded once. He kept it, she said. The property. Part of the compensation package. Which means Cassian signed off on it, Voss said quietly. 4 years ago. Before he knew. She crossed the room to Cassian, who was ending a call, and she said, New Jersey, and told him the address, and watched his face do the thing it had done this morning in the hotel suite, that fundamental internal rearrangement, and then set itself. He's been 40 minutes away this whole time, Cassian said. Yes. He looked at Voss. We go now, Cassian said. Chet. She was not supposed to be in the third car. She was very much in the third car. Voss had raised an objection, a single look more than a sentence, and Cassian had said she stays in the vehicle and looked at her, and she had said agreed and meant it, because she was not a tactical asset in a physical confrontation, and she understood her own skill set well enough to know that. What she was, in the third car with Gareth and a woman named Torres, who apparently handled whatever Gareth didn't, was the person with both notepads and the clearest picture of the operational architecture of what Kern had been building, in case it mattered. When it mattered. They moved through the evening in a column of 3 black vehicles, and the city became the tunnel, became the New Jersey sprawl, and by the time they reached the property, it was 6:47 p.m., and the light was gone, and the building at the end of the private drive was a large commercial structure that had been something industrial once, and had been converted, and which showed, from the outside, exactly nothing. No light, no sound. The absence of information that was itself information. Voss had 8 people. They moved with the systematic efficiency of professionals who had done this enough times that it had its own rhythm, its own grammar, and she watched from the third car's window and cataloged the staging the way she cataloged everything, automatically and continuously. The building's main door was open. She registered this before she could stop herself from registering it. Open before they reached it. Not forced, not blown, just open. Waiting. Her hand found the door handle. Don't, Gareth said beside her. Something's wrong with the entry, she said. Voss knows his... The door was open before they got there. That's staged. She looked at Gareth. He knew we were coming. He's had the tap on the building communication for 6 weeks. If we figured out the routing channel... Her radio, Voss had put her on channel before they left, crackled. Clear on the main floor, Voss's voice. Tight. Moving to upper level. Then, 10 seconds later, he's not here. She got out of the car. Gareth said her name. She was already moving toward the building. Inside was a large open space, former warehouse, the industrial bones still visible under the conversion, with equipment and screens and the specific archaeology of an operation that had been packed and moved in the past 4 to 6 hours. The screens were dark. The drives were gone. What was left was furniture and cables and the particular hollowness of a space that had been alive and recently wasn't. Except one screen. One screen. In the center of the room, at a table. Still on. She crossed to it. Voss materialized at her elbow and didn't stop her, which she noted. The screen showed a split feed, left side, the operations center in Cassian's building, which meant the surveillance tap was still live, still pulling images, still sending them here even though no one was here to watch them. Right side. A static image, high resolution, of a woman sitting in a garden. Not a current feed, a photograph. The woman was perhaps 60, with dark hair gone silver at the edges, and she was sitting in a garden chair with a cup of something, looking at something beyond the camera's frame, and her face had the quality of a woman who had been doing this specific ordinary thing in this specific garden long enough that she'd stopped noticing it. Below the image, a single line of text. She's been very comfortable. It would be a shame. Cassian was behind her. She felt him arrive at the edge of her peripheral vision. She heard him take a breath. That's Carla, he said. Not a question. Yes, Brennan said from somewhere to her left. He'd come in from the third car too, apparently, because everyone was in this building now, regardless of the arrangements made in the parking area, because the arrangements made in parking areas had that quality when the situation changed. Brendan was looking at the photograph with an expression she would not have been able to describe to someone who hadn't seen it. Not grief, not fear, though both of those were present. Something beneath and behind both of them. Something with 23 years of weight in it. "He's going to her," Brendan said. His voice was stripped to the essential. "He's not running. He's going to her." Marin looked at the garden, at the ordinary chair, at the cup held in two hands by a woman who didn't know that the morning had changed the mathematics of everything. "Where is she?" she said. "I can't." Brendan stopped. If you don't tell me," she said, "Kern gets there first, and whatever he does when he gets there, he's already told you what it looks like." She looked at him. "Where is she?" He told her. She was already moving. Mammed. Cassian caught her arm at the building's exit, and it was the same grip as the night before. Not restraining, just present. "Here, wait." And she stopped because she wasn't going to tear away from him in a parking lot in New Jersey, and also because she had no vehicle and no plan, and approximately 90 minutes before Kern reached a woman in a garden who did not know she needed to leave. "I go," he said. "Not you. You need to stay here and manage the Eastern Corridor announcement. If that goes out without you on it, Voss is not you." She held his eyes. The parking lot was dark and cold, and the rest of the operation was reorganizing around them, and they were standing in the middle of it, having this specific argument. The announcement is the whole point. It's the reason last night happened. It needs to go out at 8 p.m. from you, in front of the partners, not managed remotely by your security lead. She took a breath. "Send me." His jaw was tight. "Absolutely not. I'm the variable he didn't account for. He's been listening to this building for 6 weeks, and I wasn't in it for 5 days of those 6 weeks. His operational picture of me is incomplete," she pressed. "He doesn't know what I know. He doesn't know I have the full file, the routing trace, any of it. He thinks I'm—" She gestured with the notepads. "A wardrobe supervisor who happened to knock over a table." Cassian looked at her. His eyes in the parking lot light were doing the thing she'd learned to read. The full, still processing attention that meant she'd said something he didn't have an immediate answer to. "He'll have people with him," Cassian said. "How many? He's been mobile for 8 weeks on a covert operation. He's not traveling heavy." "You don't know that." "No, but I know that Voss can have 2 people to me in 45 minutes, and I know that I can get in a car right now and be there before Kern." She held his gaze. "Send Torres. Send one more. I'm not asking to go alone." "Marin, the announcement goes out at 8, she said. "Kern's whole plan depends on it not mattering when it does. You being on that announcement, present, controlled, positioned, that's the countermove. That's the thing that makes everything he spent 4 years building mean nothing." She stepped toward him slightly. "You have to be here. I have to go. Those are the only positions that work." The parking lot was very quiet around them. Cassian's hand, which had been on her arm since the building exit, shifted slightly. Not releasing, just adjusting. The quality of the contact changed in a way she cataloged and then firmly did not think about. "If anything happens," he said deep, "I'll have Torres." "If anything happens," he said it again, differently, and stopped. His jaw moved. "Come back," he said. Just those 2 words with the particular weight of something that had been decided rather than negotiated. She looked at him. "I always come back," she said. "I'm in the middle of a run. I have a Bresciano fitting Tuesday that I've already missed once." He almost smiled. She got in the car. Torres was in the passenger seat, already on her phone coordinating backup. Gareth was driving. The address Brendan had given her was in the navigation system. The clock on the dashboard read 7:03. 57 minutes. She opened her notepad to a fresh page and started writing as the car moved. Not for herself this time, but the things she knew about Kern's operational habits, his patterns, the texture of how he moved through a situation that had gone off script. Because she'd read 43 pages. Because she paid attention to things other people missed. because she was, at her foundation, a person who understood that the difference between a disaster and a controlled situation was almost always a question of who'd done the most preparation. The highway opened up ahead of them, and the car accelerated, and beside her, Torres said, "Back up ETA 40 minutes to the target location." And Marin said, "Good," and kept writing. The clock read 7:09, 48 minutes. The car moved through the dark, and the exit signs came and went, and she thought about a woman in a garden chair who had been living under someone else's name for 23 years. And she thought about Brendan's face looking at a photograph on a screen. And she thought about the specific weight in Cassian's voice when he'd said, "Come back." And she stopped thinking about all of it, because the notepad was where her attention needed to be. And she wrote, and the car moved, and somewhere ahead in the dark, Elias Kern was also moving toward a woman who had no idea what was, coming toward her through the dark. The car turned off the highway at 7:31, and the GPS took them down a two-lane road that became a smaller road that became a private drive lined with old maples, their November branches bare and reaching, and the headlights swept across them in a way that made them look, briefly, like the wings of something large and patient. Gareth cut the lights a quarter-mile out. They coasted the last stretch on momentum and parked behind a windbreak of overgrown hedgerow that hid the car from the property's sightlines. Marin had the door open before the engine was fully off. Torres caught her arm. "We wait for visual confirmation," Torres said. "How long does that take?" 2 minutes. She waited 2 minutes. She spent them looking at the property through the gap in the hedgerow. A single-story house, white clapboard, the kind of house that had been built for function and had acquired character purely through age and weather. Lights on in 2 rooms. The garden at the side, visible from this angle, empty now in the dark. A car in the drive that hadn't been there in the photograph. "That's his," Torres said, looking at the same car. "Rental. The plates match a flag Voss put on his movement pattern." "He's already inside," Marin said. Torres's jaw tightened. She was already on her earpiece. "Backup is 18 minutes out." 18 minutes was not nothing, but it was also not nothing in the other direction. Marin looked at the lit windows, at the car in the drive, at the house where a woman named Carla had been living her quiet, careful life under a name that wasn't hers, and where a man who had spent 4 years engineering a specific kind of destruction had just arrived. "I'm going to the door," Marin said. "That is not... He doesn't know me by sight. He knows I exist. He heard conversations. He has a name. He may have a photograph from the event Saturday night. But I'm a wardrobe supervisor. I'm not a threat profile." She looked at Torres. "I knock on the door. I'm lost. I need directions. I need to use a phone. I get eyes on the interior." She paused. "And I buy 18 minutes. Torres looked at her with the expression of a person making a risk calculation they didn't like any of the available answers to. "If he makes you," Torres started, "then I'm a problem he has to manage that isn't Carla," Marin said. "Either way, it buys time." Torres handed her an earpiece. "Channel 3. I hear everything. You say the word curtain, and I'm through that door in 15 seconds. Marin put in the earpiece. She left both notepads in the car. She left her phone. She went through the gap in the hedgerow and crossed the property's front lawn in the dark with the unhurried pace of someone who belonged in the vicinity, which was a performance she was more than adequately equipped to give. She knocked on the door. Nothing for 5 seconds. 8. She knocked again, the way a genuinely lost or inconvenienced person knocked. Twice, slightly impatient. The door opened. The man was not what she'd assembled from the Brussels file. The file had given her operational behavior and organizational history and communication patterns, all of which had built a picture she'd been carrying for 6 hours, and the picture was accurate but incomplete, because the file couldn't tell her the specific way he held his body in a doorway. Loose, easy. The specific ease of someone who defaulted to looking like the least interesting person in any room. He was 60, or close to it, ordinary in height, with a face that had no remarkable feature and was, she understood immediately, exactly the way he'd designed it to appear. He looked at her. She did not recognize him. That was the most important thing. She let her face do what a stranger's face did when they encountered a person they had no history with. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, with the very specific register of someone who had been driving too long and had made a navigational error and was mildly embarrassed about it. "My GPS lost signal about a mile back, and I think I turned wrong somewhere. Is there any chance I could come in? He said. The two words, easy, hospitable, no hesitation. She understood in the same moment she registered the words that it was wrong, that the hospitality was the problem, that a homeowner in a private drive on a November evening did not open their door to a stranger and immediately say, "Come in," unless the stranger arriving was something they'd expected or something they could use. She stepped inside. Because stepping back would have told him what she needed him not to know. The entryway was small, the interior warm, and to the left of the entry she could see a kitchen, and beyond it, through an open doorway, the edge of a sitting room where someone was on a sofa. A woman. Dark hair gone silver, a blanket over her legs, and the posture of someone who had been told, recently and without warmth, to stay exactly where she was. Carla. "You've had a long drive," Kern said behind her. She turned. He'd closed the door. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face arranged in the same ordinary pleasantness it had held throughout. And his eyes were doing something entirely different than his face. Very still, very focused, the quality of someone who was looking at a thing they'd already decided what to do with. "My name is Elias," he said. "What's yours?" "Marin," she said, because the file on her from the tap would have her name and lying served nothing. His face shifted, just slightly. The pleasantness didn't leave, but something repositioned underneath it, like furniture moved an inch in a room and the negative space changed. "Marin," he said. "That's right. You're a long way from Broadway." She looked at him. "Sit down," he said. The hospitality was still in the words. It had no relationship to the words anymore. The sitting room had 3 people in it. Carla on the sofa, Marin in the chair Kern indicated, Kern standing near the window that looked out at the dark garden. One more man, younger, standing near the kitchen doorway with the stance of someone whose function was simple and specific. That was the whole of it. 2. Kern had traveled with one. Torres had heard everything through the earpiece. The clock in Marin's head said 14 minutes. She looked at Carla. Carla looked back at her. She was perhaps 60, maybe slightly younger, with the face the photograph had shown and a quality the photograph hadn't. Alertness, under the forced stillness. She was frightened, but she was paying attention, and Marin recognized that as the most important thing in the room. "How did you find this address?" Kern said. Conversational, patient. "I told you," she said. "GPS error. I was looking for the highway on-ramp and—" "Marin." He said her name the way people said names when they were done with the preamble. "The routing channel trace. I want to know how fast you got there and what you did with the address when you had it." She looked at him. She did not look at her watch. She did not look at the door. She kept her eyes on his face with the specific quality of attention she'd developed over 15 years of watching people in rooms, taking everything in, showing only what she chose to. "Cassian is making the 8 o'clock announcement," she said. His face moved. Very small movement, but she'd trained herself to read small movements in controlled faces. "Whatever you've been building toward is going to land wrong," she said. "The Eastern Corridor partners are being stabilized now. The Sabo Alliance went through this morning. The announcement goes out in—" She checked deliberately, making a performance of looking at her watch. 11 minutes. With or without anything you do tonight." Kern looked at her for a long moment. "What he's announcing," Kern said carefully, "is a structure with vulnerabilities he doesn't know about yet." "He knows about the tap," she said. Another small movement. "He knows about Brussels. He knows about the 18 months of sequential partner contact." She kept her voice even. Not aggressive. Informational, the way she'd delivered information to directors who needed to understand why a costume wasn't going to be ready on the timeline they'd planned. "He knows you've been in this property for the duration. He knows the car in the driveway is a rental registered to one of 3 names you've been using since September." She paused. "What he doesn't know yet is what you're planning to do with Mrs. Sabo, but I think we all understand that whatever the plan was, it's changed in the last 10 minutes. Kern was still. The young man near the kitchen doorway had shifted his weight. She registered it without looking at him. "You came here alone," Kern said. "I came here with enough," she said. The quiet stretched. Then Carla said from the sofa, in a voice that was smaller than Marin had expected and steadier, "Who are you?" Marin looked at her. "I'm someone Brendan asked for help." The name moved through Carla's body in a way that was visible and profound. A single long breath, the kind that was doing more than breathing. "He's all right?" Carla said. "He's all right." Kern moved. Not fast, the specific controlled movement of someone executing a decision, and she had already pushed out of the chair because she'd been watching him for 11 minutes, and she'd known the movement was coming in the same way she knew a line was coming from an actor's breath pattern before they spoke it. She went sideways, not back, because back was the wall, and Kern's hand caught the chair instead of her, and the young man near the kitchen was already moving, and she said clearly into the air, "Curtain." The front door came in. Torres moved through spaces the way she moved through backstage corridors. Fast, economical, with the total commitment of someone for whom hesitation was a professional failure. And the young man near the kitchen doorway had turned toward the sound, and that was the wrong direction, and Torres covered the distance in a way that ended the young man's contribution to the evening very efficiently. Kern was between Marin and the window. He looked at her, at Torres, at the arithmetic of the room. "There's a car outside," Marin said. "There are more people in it, and in about 9 minutes Cassian Reeves is going to make an announcement that makes everything you've built in the last 4 years worth considerably less than it was this morning." Her voice was steady. Her hands were not entirely steady, but they were in her pockets, and nobody needed to see that. "You can decide what happens next, but you should know that whatever you're calculating, the value of Carla, the value of me, the value of whatever move you're considering, the calculation changed the moment the door came in." Kern stood in the space between her and the window and looked at her with those very still eyes, and she looked back and the room held that suspended quality of the moment before a production's opening line, the entire weight of everything that had built to this point compressed into the silence before the first word. He sat down. Not defeat. She understood that immediately. The gesture of a man performing surrender for its own tactical reasons, buying his own time in the same way she'd bought hers at the door. But the gun he'd been reaching for when she'd moved from the chair was not in his hand. And Torres had the room. And 9 minutes had become 8, and in 43 miles, Cassian Reeves was standing in front of a camera, preparing to announce something that 4 years of careful destruction had been designed to prevent. Marin crossed the room and sat on the sofa next to Carla. The older woman looked at her. "Are you really lost?" Carla said. "No," Marin said. Carla exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that had things in it. "He's been here for an hour," she said, quietly. Kern was 5 feet away and she said it anyway, which told Marin something important about the quality of her. "He kept saying everything was going to be fine. People who say that—" "I know," Marin said. She put her hand over Carla's hand on the sofa cushion and left it there. Darmas. Backup arrived at 7:53. Voss himself came in the second vehicle, which she hadn't expected, and he took Kern out of the room with the systematic efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this specific task for longer than the current evening. At 8 p.m. exactly, she watched on Torres's phone, in the kitchen of a white clapboard house in New Jersey, as Cassian Reeves made his announcement. He was in frame, controlled, precisely himself. The man she'd watched for 5 days. The face she'd learned to read. The carefully managed exterior with its specific interior currents. He spoke for 4 minutes. The Eastern Corridor partners had been reached. The structure held. The announcement landed the way it was designed to land. Stable, consolidated, a door closing on the space where Kern's 4 years of work had been pointed. She watched it and felt something she didn't immediately have a word for. Not relief, exactly. Something more structural than that. Carla sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that Torres had made her, and she watched the announcement too, on the small screen, with the expression of a woman watching something that was not her world, and never had been and had nonetheless determined the entire shape of her life. "Brendan," she said when it was over. Not a question, not a demand, just the word, like something she'd been holding for a long time and wasn't sure yet how to put down. "Tomorrow," Marin said. "That's a tomorrow conversation. Tonight you're going somewhere safe, and tomorrow there are conversations that need to happen and you'll have them." She paused. With Brendan, whatever else he needs to happen first. Carla looked at her. Her eyes were the specific dark that Brendan's eyes were. And Marin had met Brendan twice and already knew the shape of them well enough to recognize the inheritance. "You're not what I expected," Carla said. "From his world." "I'm not from his world," Marin said. "No," Carla said. "I can see that." She was back in the city by 10:30. Cassian met her in the lobby of his building, which was where she'd told Gareth to drop her, and she stepped out of the car and he was there. And she stood on the lobby floor in the same clothes she'd been wearing since 7 a.m. that morning and looked at him. He looked at her. "Kern?" he said. "Voss has him." "Carla?" "Safe. She's with Torres's team tonight. Tomorrow." She stopped. Reorganized. "Tomorrow is a conversation between you and Sabo. About what happens to her. About what Brendan's situation is going forward." She looked at him steadily. Brendan cooperated fully. He's the reason we had the routing trace. The reason we got there in time. That needs to be part of whatever Sabo decides. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. "You negotiated his terms on the way back," he said. "I thought about what was fair on the way back. It's not the same thing." "For you it might be." She was tired. She was tired in the specific way of someone who had been running on adrenaline and concentrated attention for 36 hours, and the body's accounting was coming due. She could feel it in her hands, in the muscles of her shoulders, in the way the lobby light felt slightly too bright. "The announcement went well," she said. "Yes." "The Eastern Corridor partners are stabilized?" "Yes." He paused. "Hartley called from London at 8:15. The alliance is solid." She nodded. The lobby was quiet around them. A building at 10:30 p.m. had its own quality. The daytime machinery switched off, only the essential systems running. She was aware of the space in a way she might not have been 48 hours ago. "The contract ended Sunday afternoon," she said. "Technically." "Technically," he agreed. "I've been operating outside its terms since approximately the point where I got in a car to New Jersey." "You have?" "I'd like to go home," she said. "To my apartment. Tonight." She held his eyes. "I need to sleep in my own bed and see my own walls and go to work tomorrow morning and touch the things that are mine." She paused. "Not because this," she gestured vaguely at the space between them, "is something I'm walking away from, but because I need to know I can walk back to it. That it's a choice I'm making, not a situation I'm inside of." Cassian was very still. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "Yes." Not defensive, not wounded, just, "Yes, I understand exactly what you mean, and I'm not going to make it into something it isn't." She had come, over 5 days and one extraordinary night, to recognize this quality in him as one of the things that was specifically and particularly his, the capacity to hear something difficult without immediately organizing his response around his own reaction to it. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. "All right." "After the Bresciano fitting." Something moved in his face. "You'll go to the fitting?" "I missed it once. I'm not missing it twice." She picked up her kit, which she'd apparently been holding since she walked in, the automatic possession that lived on her shoulder, and went where she went. "Make sure Sabo understands what Brendan's cooperation cost him. That's not a request." "I know." She started toward the exit. The car was still outside. She'd get a cab. "Marin." She stopped, turned. He was standing in the lobby in the same suit he'd been in all day, and he looked like what he was. A man who had been running at maximum capacity for 36 hours and had reached the point where the infrastructure of the composed exterior was showing the effort it was taking. He looked, in this lobby at this hour, more precisely like himself than she'd seen him in any of the careful social performances of the weekend, the almost smile that was always held back. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "I know that's not adequate," he said, "for the specific thing you did, for Carla, for—" He stopped. "I know." "It's adequate," she said. "It's even—" She paused, finding the right word, because she was a person who cared about the right word. "It's enough." She walked out. Well, she slept for 11 hours. She woke at 10 a.m. on Monday and lay in her own bed looking at her own ceiling. at the water stain above the window that she'd been meaning to have looked at for 3 years, at the stack of production scripts on the bedside table, at the garnet earrings on the small dish where she always put them when she came home. They were still there. She'd taken them off at some point. She couldn't remember when exactly, which told her something about the state she'd been in. She lay there for 20 minutes, which was unusual. She was not by nature or by practice a person who lay in bed. She got up when she woke up. She had things to go to. She was aware of a sensation she kept returning to and then moving away from, like a bruise she kept discovering. Not unpleasant, just present. The specific feeling of having been inside something large and come out the other side changed by it in a way she hadn't finished mapping yet. She got up. She made coffee. She called Priya. "The Bresciano fitting," she said. "Can we push it to 2?" "Already pushed it," Priya said. "I had a feeling. How are you?" "Operational," Marin said, which was the word she used when she was functional but not yet fully present. And Priya had worked with her long enough to know exactly what it meant. "There are flowers," Priya said. "At the theater. They arrived this morning." "No card." Marin looked at her coffee. "What kind?" she said. "I don't know flowers. They're dark red. Some of them have thorns still on." She looked at her coffee for another moment. "I'll be there at 1:30, she said. Chat. 3 weeks later, Voss testified before a federal task force that had been building a case against Kern's Brussels operation for 2 years without the specific internal evidence they needed to make it actionable. The routing documentation, the operational files, the tap infrastructure still active in Cashin's building, all of it went over in a transfer that Marin was not present for and did not need to be present for, because her contribution to that architecture had been the routing trace and the 43 pages and the specific shape of her attention in a basement room in New Jersey on a Sunday night, and all of that was already done. Kern went federal, which was, as Cassian explained to her in the kind of brief and precise conversation she'd come to expect from him, the outcome that made the most sense from everyone's perspective. Kern in federal custody was contained. Kern in any other configuration was a loose variable, and she understood by now that loose variables were something both of them found difficult. Brendan Sabo spent 2 weeks in a conversation she was not part of and didn't ask about, because it was between him and his father, and it was 23 years of compressed weight being unpacked in whatever way two people unpack that kind of thing, which was never clean and never quick and never anyone else's business. What she knew, because Cassian told her and because she'd asked him to tell her, Carla was no longer in the coastal house. She'd been relocated. Her choice, her terms, a location nobody gave to Marin because she hadn't asked. Brendan visited her the second week. The conversation he'd been waiting 23 years to have happened somewhere with a door and privacy and whatever the two of them needed in that room, and Marin did not know what was said and would not pretend to. She thought about it sometimes. The cup of tea, the dark eyes that were Brendan's eyes, the woman who had been living under someone else's name in someone else's garden, who had kept the letter she'd sent through her sister until the paper wore thin at the folds. She thought, that has to be enough for now. And it was. Go on. The conversation she'd told Cassian she'd have with him, the one that wasn't walking away but was choosing, happened on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after New Jersey, in a restaurant she'd picked because it was hers. Not a place he would have chosen, not a place that said anything about his world, a neighborhood Italian on the Upper West Side, where the owner knew her name and the pasta was the kind of pasta that understood its own purpose. Cassian sat across from her looking slightly uncertain about the restaurant in a way he was doing a reasonable job of not showing, and she found this specifically quietly endearing, which was not a word she'd expected to apply to him, but language was language, and it applied. "Tell me something that isn't about any of this," she said. "Not the operation, not Kern, not the alliance." He looked at her. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Something you'd tell someone you were actually seeing, not briefing." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him locate something in himself that wasn't the composed operational exterior. "I had a dog," he said, "when I was building the first part of the organization, before it was anything. He was a very large, profoundly stupid animal who was afraid of rain and snored in a way that probably cost me 2 years of sleep." A pause. "I miss him." She looked at him. "He died 7 years ago," he said. "I haven't—" He stopped. I didn't want another one. She thought about that. About a man she'd spent 5 days watching and 36 hours relying on, sitting somewhere 7 years ago with the absence of a very large, stupid dog and the specific shape of that kind of loss. What was his name? She said. Brackett, he said. Brackett. He was a boxer. He had this habit of sitting in doorways. The almost smile came, and for the first time she'd seen, actually became a full one. Small, real, briefly visible. I was always walking into him. She looked at the full smile and registered it in the same place she kept the other things she'd registered about him, the growing catalog of a person who had turned out to be substantially more than the file she'd started building on day one. Cassian, she said. Yes. I'm not performing this, she said. I want to be clear about that. Whatever I'm doing here, whatever I was doing in New Jersey, it wasn't performance. He met her eyes. I know. The contract was performance. The 8 years of fictional history, the rehearsed answers, the crimson gown, those were the job. She looked at her hands on the table, then at him. This is different. I know, he said again, and then, the gown wasn't performance. She looked at him. You built it yourself, he said. For a role, yes. But you built it the way you build things that matter to you. I've watched you enough to know the difference. His voice was careful, the way it was careful when something was precise. That gown was, he paused. True. The word landed without ornamentation, and she let it. The contract was $2 million for 20 hours, she said. As a starting point for whatever this is, that's unusual. Yes, he said. I want... She stopped, started again. I want to know what this is at the pace that it actually is, not accelerated by circumstance, not by what happened. She held his eyes. We've been through something extraordinary together that creates an intimacy that isn't the same as actually knowing each other. We know each other more than you think, he said, and less than we should, for what we've been acting like we are. She kept her voice even. So I want to have dinner, and then another dinner, and then whatever comes after dinners, at the pace it comes. She paused. Is that? Yes, he said. Before she could finish, simple and complete. She looked at him across the table in the restaurant she'd chosen, in the neighborhood that was hers, with the owner who knew her name, and she thought about the 48 hours that had started in a penthouse on Park Avenue with a costume repair kit and a willingness to knock over expensive furniture, and she thought about a contract she'd written with conditions, and a woman in a coastal garden, and a very large dog named Brackett, and she thought, this is the actual thing, not the 8 years of fiction I constructed, not the crimson gown I built to be seen in, this conversation, this table, this Wednesday. Eat something, she said. You're looking at the menu like it requires strategic analysis. He looked at the menu, then at her. There are a lot of options. It's pasta, she said. Pick the one that sounds like what you want. He looked back at the menu. What do you get? He said. The cacio e pepe. Every time. I've never ordered anything else. Why would you order anything else? Exactly, she said. The waiter came. Cassian ordered the cacio e pepe without further deliberation, and she caught the shift in his expression when he did it. A small, released thing, the specific lightness of a person who had spent a long time making every choice a calculation and had just made one that wasn't. She looked at the restaurant around them, the ordinary Wednesday evening humanity of it, people eating dinner, having conversations, moving through the material of their lives in the way that people did when they weren't in the middle of something extraordinary. She had a Bresciano fitting at 10 a.m. tomorrow. She had a meeting with the board of the theater about next season's budget at 2. She had an apprentice who needed a real sit-down conversation about fabric sourcing by the end of the week. She had, in other words, the full and ongoing texture of her actual life, which had been temporarily eclipsed and was now reasserting itself, as actual lives did, with all its particular demands and textures and the specific weight of things that were hers. And across the table, a man who had built an empire on the principle that everything had a price was eating pasta in a restaurant on the Upper West Side because she'd told him to pick the one that sounded like what he wanted. She reached across the table and broke a piece of bread and ate it. Outside, the city continued its work. The November that had begun with gunfire and chandeliers and a crimson gown built in the small hours of the morning was giving way to December, to the particular quality of light that came when the year began its final accounting. Somewhere in this city, a federal case was building its foundations. Somewhere Brendan Sabo was learning, at 28, what it felt like to be seen by the person you'd come from. Somewhere a woman named Carla was living, for the first time in 23 years, under her own name. And here, at a corner table in a restaurant that smelled like garlic and old wood, two people who had found each other through the most elaborate possible series of accidents were having dinner at the pace that dinner actually was. The bread was good. The wine was better. Marin Holloway, who had walked into the most dangerous room in New York carrying a needle and thread, had not become something different on the other side of everything that had happened. She was still precise and pragmatic and unapologetic and constitutionally incapable of leaving a costume flaw unaddressed. She was also, for the first time in a long time, eating dinner with someone who had looked at all of that and said yes, without reservation, this is what I want. Not because she'd performed it, not because she'd built it to specification, but because she'd simply, entirely, been herself. The contract had been $2 million. The renegotiation had no price. Those were different things. She knew the difference.